Chapter 19, Part 1 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 22, Chapter 19, Part 1. I fall in love with Christine, and find a husband worthy of her. Christine's wedding. These gondoliers, said the elderly priest, addressing me in order to begin the conversation, are very fortunate. They took us up at the Rialto for 30 soldi on condition that they be allowed to embark other passengers. And here is one already. They will certainly find more. When I am in a gondola, reverend sir, there is no room left for any more passengers. So saying, I gave 40 more soldi to the gondoliers, who were highly pleased with my generosity, thanked me, and called me Excellency. The good priest, accepting that title as truly belonging to me, entreats my pardon for not having addressed me as such. I am not a Venetian nobleman, reverend sir, and I have no right to the title of Eccellenza. Ah, says the young lady, I am very glad of it. Well, why so, signora? Because when I find myself near a nobleman, I am afraid. But I suppose that you are an illustrissimo. Not even that, signora. I am only an advocate's clerk. So much the better, for I like to be in the company of persons who do not think themselves above me. My father was a farmer, brother of my uncle here, rector of P, where I was born and bred. As I am an only daughter, I inherited my father's property after his death, and I shall likewise be heiress to my mother, who has been ill for a long time and cannot live much longer, which causes me a great deal of sorrow. But it is the doctor who says it. Now, to return to my subject, I do not suppose that there is much difference between an advocate's clerk and the daughter of a rich farmer. I only say so for the sake of saying something, for I know very well that, in travelling, one must accept all sorts of companions. Is it not so, uncle? Yes, my dear Christine, and as a proof, you see that this gentleman has accepted our company without knowing who or what we are. But do you not think I would not have come if I had not been attracted by the beauty of your lovely niece? At these words the good people burst out laughing. As I did not think that there was anything very comic in what I had said, I judged that my travelling companions were rather simple, and I was not sorry to find them so. Why do you laugh so heartily, beautiful Demigella? Is it to show me your fine teeth? I confess that I have never seen such a splendid set in Venice. Oh, it is not for that, sir, although everyone in Venice has paid me the same compliment. I can assure you that in P all the girls have teeth as fine as mine. Is it not a fact, uncle? Yes, my dear niece. I was laughing, sir, at a thing which I will never tell you. Oh, tell me, I entreat you. Oh, certainly not, never. I will tell you myself, says the curate. You will not, she exclaims, knitting her beautiful eyebrows. If you do, I will go away. I defy you to do it, my dear. Do you know what she has said, sir, when she saw you on the wharf? Here is a very handsome young man who is looking at me, and would not be sorry to be with us. And when she saw that the gondoliers were putting back for you to embark, she was delighted. While the uncle was speaking to me, the indignant niece was slapping him on the shoulder. Why are you angry, lovely Christine, at my hearing that you liked my appearance, when I am so glad to let you know how truly charming I think you? Oh, you are glad for a moment. Oh, I know the Venetians thoroughly now. They have all told me that they were charmed with me, and not one of those I would have ever liked have ever made a declaration to me. What sort of declaration did you want? There was only one sort for me, sir, the declaration leading to a good marriage in church, in the sight of all men. Yet we remained a fortnight in Venice, did we not, uncle? This girl, said the uncle, is a good match, for she possesses 3,000 crowns. She has always said she would marry only a Venetian, and I have accompanied her to Venice to give her an opportunity of being known. A worthy woman gave us hospitality for a fortnight, and has presented my niece in several houses, where she made the acquaintance of marriageable young men. But those who pleased her would not hear of marriage, and those who would have been glad to marry her did not take her fancy. But do you imagine, reverend sir, that marriages can be made like omelets? A fortnight in Venice? That is nothing. You ought to live there at least 6 months. Now, for instance, I think your niece sweetly pretty, and I should consider myself fortunate if the wife whom God intends for me were like her. But even if she offered me now a dowry of 50,000 crowns, on condition that our wedding takes place immediately, I would refuse her. A prudent young man wants to know the character of a girl before he marries her, for it is neither money nor beauty which can assure happiness in married life. Well, what do you mean by character? Asked Christine. Is it beautiful handwriting? No, my dear. I mean the qualities of the mind and the heart. I shall most likely get married some time, and I have been looking for a wife for the last 3 years, but I am still looking in vain. I have known several young girls almost as lovely as you are, and all with a good marriage portion, but after an acquaintance of 2 or 3 months, I found out that they could not make me happy. In what were they deficient? Well, I will tell you, because you are not acquainted with them, and there can be no indiscretion on my part. One, whom I certainly would have married, for I loved her dearly, was extremely vain. She would have ruined me in fashionable clothes, and by her love for luxuries. Fancy! She was in the habit of paying 1 sequin every month to the hairdresser, and at least as much for the pomatum and perfumes. She was a giddy and foolish girl. Now, I only spend 10 soldi in a year on wax, which I mix with goat's grease, and there I have an excellent pomatum. Another, whom I would have married 2 years ago, laboured under a disease which would have made me unhappy. As soon as I knew of it, I ceased my visits. Well, what disease was it? A disease which would have prevented her from being a mother, and if I get married, I wish to have children. All of that is in God's hands, but I know that my health is excellent, is it not, uncle? Another was too devout, and that does not suit me. She was so over-scrupulous that she was in the habit of going to her confessor twice a week, and every time her confession lasted at least 1 hour. I want my wife to be a good Christian, but not bigoted. She must have been a great sinner, or else she was very foolish. I confess only once a month, and get through everything in 2 minutes. Is it not true, uncle? And if you were to ask me any questions, uncle, I should not know what more to say. One young lady thought herself more learned than I, although she would every minute utter some absurdity. Another was always low-spirited, and my wife must be cheerful. Hark to that, uncle! You and my mother are always chiding me for my cheerfulness. Another, whom I did not court long, was always afraid of being alone with me, and if I gave her a kiss, she would run and tell her mother. How silly she must have been! I have never yet listened to a lover, for we have only rude peasants in P, but I know very well that there are some things which I would not tell my mother. One had a rank breath, another painted her face, and indeed almost every young girl is guilty of that fault. I am afraid marriage is out of the question for me, because I want, for instance, my wife to have black eyes, and in our days almost every woman colours them by art, but I cannot be deceived, for I am a good judge. Are mine black? You are laughing. I laugh because your eyes certainly appear to be black, but they are not so in reality. Never mind, you are very charming in spite of that. Now that is amusing. You pretend to be a good judge, yet you say my eyes are dyed black. My eyes, sir, whether beautiful or ugly, are now the same as God made them. Is it not so, uncle? I never had any doubt of it, my dear niece. And do you not believe me, sir? No, no, they are too beautiful for me to believe that they are natural. Oh, dear me, I cannot bear it. Excuse me, my lovely Damigella, I am afraid I have been too sincere. After that quarrel we remained silent. The good curate smiled now and then, but his niece found it very hard to keep down her sorrow. At intervals I stole a look at her face, and I could see that she was very near crying. I felt sorry, for she was a charming girl. In her hair, dressed in the fashion of wealthy countrywomen, she had more than 100 sequins worth of gold pins and arrows which fastened the plaits of her long locks, as dark as ebony. Heavy gold earrings and a long chain, which was wound 20 times round her snowy neck, made a fine contrast to her complexion, on which the lilies and the roses were admirably blended. It was the first time that I had seen a country beauty in such splendid apparel. 6 years before, Lucy at Pezine had captivated me, but in a different manner. Christine did not utter a single word. She was in despair, for her eyes were truly of the greatest beauty, and I was cruel enough to attack them. She evidently hated me, and her anger alone kept back her tears. Yet I would not undeceive her, for I wanted her to bring matters to a climax. When the gondola had entered the long canal at Marghera, I asked the clergyman whether he had a carriage to go to Treviso, through which place he had to pass to reach P. I intended to walk, said the worthy man, for my parish is poor, and I am the same, but I will try to obtain a place for Christine in some carriage travelling that way. You would confer a real kindness on me if you would both accept a seat in my chaise. It holds 4 persons, and there is plenty of room. It is a good fortune which we were far from expecting. Not at all, uncle. I will not go with this gentleman. Well, why not, my dear niece? Because I will not. Such is the way, I remarked without looking at her, that sincerity is generally rewarded. Sincerity, sir? Nothing of the sort, she exclaimed angrily. It is sheer wickedness. There can be no true black eyes now for you in the world, but as you like them, I am very glad of it. You are mistaken, lovely Christine, for I have the means of ascertaining the truth. What means? Only to wash the eyes with a little lukewarm rose-water, or if the lady cries, the artificial colour is certain to be washed off. At those words the scene changed as if by a wand of a conjurer. The face of the charming girl, which had expressed nothing but indignation, spite, and disdain, took an air of contentment and placidity delightful to witness. She smiled at her uncle, who was much pleased with the change in her countenance, for the offer of the carriage had gone to his heart. Now you better cry a little, my dear niece, and Il Signore will render full justice to your eyes. Christine cried in reality, but it was immoderate laughter that made her tears flow. That species of natural originality pleased me greatly, and as we were going up the steps at the landing-place, I offered her my full apologies. She accepted the carriage. I ordered breakfast, and told a vetturino to get a very handsome chaise ready while we had our meal, but the curate said he must first of all go and say his mass. Very well, reverend sir, we will hear it, and you must say it for my intention. I put a silver ducat in his hand. It is what I am in the habit of giving, I observed. My generosity surprised him so much that he wanted to kiss my hand. We proceeded towards the church, and I offered my arm to the niece, who, not knowing whether she ought to accept it or not, said to me, "Do you suppose that I cannot walk alone?" "I have no such idea, but if I do not give you my arm, people will think me wanting in politeness." "Well, I will take it, but now that I have your arm, what will people think?" "Perhaps that we love each other, and that we make a very nice couple. And if anyone should inform your mistress that we are in love with each other, or even that you have given your arm to a young girl? I have no mistress, and I shall have none in future, because I cannot find a girl as pretty as you in all Venice. I am very sorry for you, for we cannot go again to Venice, and even if we could, how could we remain there 6 months? You said that 6 months was necessary to know a girl well. I would willingly defray all your expenses. Indeed? Then say so to my uncle, and he will think it over, for I could not go alone. In 6 months you would know me likewise. Oh, I know you very well already. Could you accept a man like me? Why not? And will you love me? Yes, very much, when you are my husband. I looked at the young girl with astonishment. She seemed to me a princess in the disguise of a peasant girl. Her dress, made of gros de Tours, and all embroidered in gold, was very handsome, and cost certainly twice as much as the finest dress of a Venetian lady. Her bracelets, matching the neck-chain, completed her rich toilet. She had the figure of a nymph, and the new fashion of wearing a mantle not having yet reached her village. I could see her most magnificent bosom, although her dress was fastened up to the neck. The end of the richly embroidered skirt did not go lower than the ankles, which allowed me to admire the neatest little foot, and the lower part of an exquisitely moulded leg. Her firm and easy walk, the natural freedom of all her movements, a charming look which seemed to say, I am very glad you think me pretty. Everything, in short, caused the ardent fire of amorous desires to circulate through my veins. I could not conceive how such a lovely girl could have spent a fortnight in Venice without finding a man to marry her, or to deceive her. I was particularly delighted with her simple, artless way of talking, which in the city might have been taken for silliness. Absorbed in my thoughts, and having resolved in my own mind on rendering brilliant homage to her charms, I waited impatiently for the end of the mass. After breakfast I had great difficulty in convincing the curate that my seat in the carriage was the last one, but I found it easier to persuade him on our arrival in Treviso to remain for dinner and for supper at a small, unfrequented inn, and I took all the expense upon myself. He accepted very willingly when I added that immediately after supper a carriage would be in readiness to convey him to P, where he would arrive in an hour after a pleasant journey by moonlight. He had nothing to hurry him on except his wish to say mass in his own church the next morning. I ordered a fire and a good dinner, and the idea struck me that the curate himself might pledge the ring for me, and thus give me the opportunity of a short interview with his niece. I proposed it to him, saying I could not very well go myself, as I did not wish to be known. He undertook the commission at once, explaining his pleasure at doing something to oblige me. He left us, and I remained alone with Christine. I spent an hour with her without trying to give her even a kiss, although I was dying to do so, but I prepared her heart to burn with the same desires which were already burning in me by those words which so easily inflame the imagination of a young girl. The curate came back and returned me the ring, saying that it could not be pledged until the day after the morrow, in consequence of the festival of the Holy Virgin. He had spoken to the cashier, who had stated that if I liked, the bank would lend me double the sum if I had asked. My dear sir, I said, you would greatly oblige me if you would come back here from P to pledge the ring yourself. Now that it had been offered once by you, it might look very strange if it were brought by another person. Of course I will pay all your expenses. Well, I promise you to come back. I hoped he would bring his niece with him. I was seated opposite to Christine during the dinner, and I discovered fresh charms in her every minute, but fearing I might lose her confidence if I tried to obtain some slight favour, I made up my mind not to go to work too quickly, and to contrive that the curate should take her again to Venice. I thought that there only I could manage to bring love into play, and to give it the food it requires. Reverend sir, I said, let me advise you to take your niece again to Venice. I undertake to defray all expenses and to find an honest woman with whom your Christine will be as safe as with her own mother. I want to know her well in order to make her my wife, and if she comes to Venice, our marriage is certain. Sir, I will bring my niece myself to Venice as soon as you inform me that you have found a worthy woman with whom I can leave her in safety. While we were talking, I kept looking at Christine, and I could see her smile with contentment. My dear Christine, I said, within a week I shall have arranged the affair. In the meantime I will write to you. I hope that you have no objection to correspond with me. My uncle will write for me, for I have never been taught writing. What, my dear child, you wish to become a wife of a Venetian, and you cannot write? Is it then necessary to know how to write in order to become a wife? I can read well. That is not enough, and although a girl can be a wife and a mother without knowing how to trace one letter, it is generally admitted that a young girl ought to be able to write. I wonder you never learned. There is no wonder in that, for not one girl in our village can do it. Ask my uncle. It is perfectly true, but there is not one who thinks of getting married in Venice, and as you wish for a Venetian husband, you must learn. Certainly, I said, and before you come to Venice, for everybody would laugh at you if you could not write. I see that it makes you sad, my dear, but it cannot be helped. I am sad because I cannot learn writing in a week. I undertake, said her uncle, to teach you in a fortnight, if you will only practice diligently. You will know enough to be able to improve by your own exertions. It is a great undertaking, but I accept it, and I promise to work night and day and to begin tomorrow. After dinner, I advised the priest not to leave that evening, to rest during the night, and I observed that, by going away before daybreak, he would reach P in good time, and feel all the better for it. I made the same proposal to him in the evening, and when he saw that his niece was sleepy, he was easily persuaded to remain. I called for the innkeeper, ordered a carriage for the clergyman, and desired that a fire might be lit for me in the next room, where I would sleep, but the good priest said it was unnecessary, because there were 2 large beds in our room, that one would be for me, and the other for him and his niece. We need not undress, he added, as we mean to leave very early, but you can take your clothes off, sir, because you are not going with us, and you would like to remain in bed tomorrow morning. Oh, remarked Christine, I must undress myself, otherwise I could not sleep, but I only want a few minutes to be ready in the morning. I said nothing, but I was amazed. Christine, then, lovely and charming enough to wreck the chastity of his Xenocrates, would sleep naked with her uncle. True, he was old, devout, without any ideas which would render such a position dangerous, yet the priest was a man. He had evidently felt like all men, and he ought to have known the danger he was exposing himself to. My carnal mindedness could not realize such a state of innocence, but it was truly innocent, so much so that he did it openly and did not suppose that anyone could not see anything wrong in it. I saw it all plainly, but I was not accustomed to such things, and felt lost in wonderment. As I advanced in age and in experience, I have seen the same custom established in many countries amongst honest people, whose good morals were in no way debased by it, but it was amongst good people, and I could not pretend to belong to that worthy class. We had no meat for dinner, and my delicate palate was not over-satisfied. I went down to the kitchen myself, and I told the landlady that I wanted the best that could be procured in Treviso for supper, particularly in wines. If you do not mind the expense, sir, trust to me, and I will undertake to please you. I will give you some Gatta wine. All right, but let us have supper early. When I returned to our room, I found Christine caressing the cheeks of her old uncle, who was laughing. The good man was 75 years old. Do you know what is the matter? He said to me. My niece is caressing me because she wants to leave me here until my return. She tells me that you are like brother and sister during the hour you spent alone together this morning, and I believe it, but she does not consider that she would be a great trouble to you. Oh, not at all, quite the reverse. She will afford me great pleasure, for I think her very charming. As to our mutual behaviour, I believe you can trust both of us to do our duty." "I have no doubt of it. Well, I will leave her under your care until the day after tomorrow. I will come back early in the morning so as to attend to your business." This extraordinary and unexpected arrangement caused the blood to rush to my head with such a violence that my nose bled profusely for the quarter of an hour. It did not frighten me, because I was used to such accidents, but the good priest was in a great fright, thinking that it was a serious hemorrhage. When I had allayed his anxiety, he left us on some business of his own, saying that he would return at nightfall. I remained alone with the charming, artless Christine, and lost no time in thanking her for the confidence she placed in me. "I can assure you," she said, "that I wish you to have a thorough knowledge of me. You will see that I have none of the faults which have displeased you so much in the young ladies you have known in Venice, and I promise to learn writing immediately." "You are charming and true, but you must be discreet in P, and confide to no one that we have entered into an agreement with each other. You must act according to your uncle's instructions, for it is to him that I intend to write to make all arrangements." "You may rely on my discretion. I will not say anything, even to my own mother, until you give me permission to do so." I passed the afternoon in denying myself even the slightest liberties with my lovely companion, but falling every minute deeper in love with her. I told her a few love stories which I veiled sufficiently not to shock her modesty. She felt interested, and I could see that, although she did not always understand, she pretended to do so, in order not to appear ignorant. When her uncle returned, I had arranged everything in my mind to make her my wife, and I resolved on placing her, during her stay in Venice, in the house of the same honest widow with whom I had found a lodging for my beautiful Countess A. S. We had a delicious supper. I had to teach Christine how to eat oysters and truffles, which she then saw for the first time. Gatta wine is like champagne, it causes merriment without intoxicating, but it cannot be kept for more than 1 year. We went to bed before midnight, and it was broad daylight when I awoke. The curate had left the room so quietly that I had not heard him. I looked towards the other bed. Christine was asleep. I wished her good morning. She opened her eyes, and leaning on her elbow, she smiled sweetly. "My uncle is gone. I did not hear him." "Dearest Christine, you are as lovely as one of God's angels. I have a great longing to give you a kiss." "If you long for a kiss, my dear friend, come and give me one." I jump out of bed. Decency makes her hide her face. It was cold, and I was in love. I find myself in her arms by one of those spontaneous movements which sentiment alone can cause, and we belong to each other without having thought of it, she happy and rather confused, I delighted, yet unable to realize the truth of a victory won without any contest. An hour passed in the midst of happiness, during which we forgot the whole world. Calm followed the stormy gusts of passionate love, and we gazed at each other without speaking. Christine was the first to break the silence. "What have we done?" she said softly and lovingly. "We have become husband and wife." "What will my uncle say tomorrow?" "He need not know anything about it until he gives us the nuptial benediction in his own church." "And when will he do so?" "As soon as we have completed all the arrangements necessary for a public marriage." "How long will that be?" "About a month." "We cannot be married during Lent." "I will obtain permission." "You are not deceiving me?" "No, for I adore you." "Then you no longer want to know me better?" "No, I know you thoroughly now, and I feel certain that you will make me happy." "And will you make me happy too?" "I hope so." "Let us go up and go to church. Who could have believed that, to get a husband, it was necessary not to go to Venice, but to come back from that city?" We got up, and after partaking of some breakfast, we went to hear mass. The morning passed off quickly, but towards dinner time I thought that Christine looked different to what she did the day before, and I asked her the reason of that change. "It must be," she said, "the same reason which causes you to be thoughtful." An air of thoughtfulness, my dear, is proper to love when it finds itself in consultation with honour. This affair has become serious, and love is now compelled to think and consider. We want to be married in the church, and we cannot do it before Lent, now that we are in the last days of Carnival. Yet we cannot wait until Easter, it would be too long. We must therefore obtain a dispensation in order to be married. Have I not reason to be thoughtful? Her only answer was to come and kiss me tenderly. I had spoken the truth, yet I had not told her all my reasons for being so pensive. I found myself drawn into an engagement which was not disagreeable to me, but I wished it had not been so very pressing. I could not conceal from myself that repentance was beginning to creep into my amorous and well-disposed mind, and I was grieved at it. I felt certain, however, that the charming girl would never have any cause to reproach me for her misery. We had the whole evening before us, and as she had told me that she had never gone to a theatre, I resolved on affording her that pleasure. I sent for a Jew, with whom I procured everything necessary to disguise her, and we went to the theatre. A man in love enjoys no pleasure but that which he gives to the woman he loves. After the performance was over, I took her to the casino, and her astonishment made me laugh when she saw for the first time a faro bank. I had not enough money to play myself, but I had more than enough to amuse her and to let her play a reasonable game. I gave her 10 sequins and explained what she had to do. She did not even know the cards, yet in less than an hour she had won 100 sequins. I made her leave off playing, and we returned to the inn. When we were in our room, I told her how much money she had, and when I assured her that all the gold belonged to her, she thought it was a dream. "Oh, what will my uncle say?" she exclaimed. We had a light supper, and spent a delightful night, taking good care to part by daybreak, so as not to be caught in the same bed by the worthy ecclesiastic. He arrived early, and found us sleeping soundly in our respective beds. He woke me, and I gave him the ring, which he went to pledge immediately. When he returned 2 hours later, he saw us dressed and talking quietly near the fire. As soon as he came in, Christine rushed to embrace him, and she showed him all the gold she had in her possession. What a pleasant surprise for the good old priest! He did not know how to express his wonder. He thanked God for what he called a miracle, and he concluded by saying that we were made to ensure each other's happiness. End of chapter 19, part 1. Chapter 19, part 2 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 22, Chapter 19, Part 2. The time to part had come. I promised to pay them a visit in the first days of Lent, but on condition that on my arrival in P I would not find anyone informed of my name or of my concerns. The curate gave me the certificate of birth of his niece and the account of her possessions. As soon as they had gone, I took my departure for Venice, full of love for the charming girl, and determined on keeping my engagement with her. I knew how easy it would be for me to convince my 3 friends that my marriage had been irrevocably written in the great book of fate. My return caused the greatest joy to the 3 excellent men, because, not being accustomed to see me for 3 days absent, M. Dandolo and M. Barbaro were afraid of some accident having befallen me, but M. de Bragadin's faith was stronger, and he allayed their fears, saying to them, with Paralis watching over me, I could not be in any danger. The very next day I resolved on ensuring Christine's happiness without making her my wife. I had thought of marrying her when I loved her better than myself, but after obtaining possession, the balance was so much on my side that my self-love proved stronger than my love for Christine. I could not make up my mind to renounce the advantages, the hopes which I had thought were attached to my happy independence. Yet I was the slave of sentiment, To abandon the artless, innocent girl seemed to me an awful crime of which I could not be guilty, and the mere idea of it made me shudder. I was aware that she was, perhaps, bearing in her womb a living token of our mutual love, and I shivered at the bare possibility that her confidence in me might be repaid by shame and everlasting misery. I bethought myself of finding her a husband in every way better than myself, a husband so good that she would not only forgive me for the insult I should thus be guilty of towards her, but also thank me at the end, and like me all the better for my deceit. To find such a husband could not be very difficult, for Christine was not only blessed with wonderful beauty, and with a well-established reputation for virtue, but she was also the possessor of a fortune amounting to 4,000 Venetian ducats. Shut up in a room with the 3 worshippers of my oracle, I consulted Paralis upon the affair which I had so much at heart. The answer was, "Serenus must attend to it." Serenus was the cabalistic name of M. de Bragadin, and the excellent man immediately expressed himself ready to execute all the orders of Paralis. It was my duty to inform him of those orders. "You must," I said to him, "obtain from the Holy Father a dispensation for a worthy and virtuous girl, so as to give her the privilege of marrying during Lent in the church of her village. She is a young country girl. Here is the certificate of birth. The husband is not yet known, but it does not matter. Paralis undertakes to find one." "Trust to me," said my father. "I will write at once to our ambassador in Rome, and I will contrive to have my letter sent by special express. You need not be anxious, leave it all to me. I will make it a business of state, and I must obey Paralis, all the more readily that I foresee that the intended husband is one of us 4. Indeed, we must prepare ourselves to obey." I had some trouble in keeping my laughter down, for it was in my power to metamorphose Christine into a grand Venetian lady, the wife of a senator, but it was not my intention. I again consulted the oracle in order to ascertain who would be the husband of the young girl, and the answer was that M. Dandolo was entrusted with the care of finding one, young, handsome, virtuous, and able to serve the Republic, either at home or abroad. M. Dandolo was to consult me before concluding any arrangements. I gave him courage for his task by informing him that the girl had a dowry of 4,000 ducats, but I added that his choice was to be made within a fortnight. M. Bragadin, delighted at not being entrusted with the commission, laughed heartily. Those arrangements made me feel at peace with myself. I was certain that the husband I wanted would be found, and I only thought of finishing the carnival gaily, and of contriving to find my purse ready for a case of emergency. Fortune soon rendered me possessor of 1,000 sequins. I paid my debts, and the licence for marriage having arrived from Rome 10 days after M. de Bragadin had applied for it, I gave him 100 ducats, that being the sum it had cost. The dispensation gave Christine the right of being married in any church in Christendom. She would only have to obtain the seal of the episcopal court in the diocese in which the marriage was to take place, and no publication of banns was required. We wanted, therefore, but one thing, a trifling one, namely, the husband. M. Dandolo had already proposed 3 or 4 to me, but I had refused them for excellent reasons. At last he offered one who suited me exactly. I had to take the diamond ring out of pledge, and not wishing to do it myself, I wrote to the priest making an appointment in Treviso. I was not, of course, surprised when I found that he was accompanied by his young niece, who, thinking that I had come to complete all arrangements for our marriage, embraced me without ceremony, and I did the same. If the uncle had not been present, I am afraid that those kisses would have caused all my heroism to vanish. I gave the curate the dispensation, and the handsome features of Christine shone with joy. She certainly could not imagine that I had been working so actively for others, and as I was not yet certain of anything, I did not undeceive her then. I promised to be in P within 8 or 10 days, when we would complete all necessary arrangements. After dinner I gave the curate the ticket for the ring and the money to bring it out of pledge, and we retired to rest. This time, very fortunately, there was but one bed in the room, and I had to take another chamber for myself. The next morning I went into Christine's room and found her in bed. Her uncle had gone out for my diamond ring, and, alone with that lovely girl, I found that I had, when necessary, complete control over my passions. Thinking that she was not to be my wife, and that she would belong to another, I considered it my duty to silence my desires. I kissed her, but nothing more. I spent 1 hour with her, fighting like Saint Anthony against the carnal desires of my nature. I could see the charming girl full of love and at wonder at my reserve, and I admired her virtue and the natural modesty which prevented her from making the first advances. She got out of bed and dressed herself without showing any disappointment. She would, of course, have felt mortified if she had the slightest idea that I despised her or that I did not value her charms. Her uncle returned, gave me the ring, and we had dinner, after which he treated me to a wonderful exhibition. Christine had learned how to write, and he gave me proof of her talent. She wrote very fluently and very prettily in my presence. We parted after my promising to come back again within 10 days, and I returned to Venice. On the second Sunday in Lent, M. Dandolo told me with an air of triumph that the fortunate husband had been found, and there was no doubt of my approval of the new candidate. He named Charles, whom I knew by sight, very handsome young man, of irreproachable conduct, and about 22 years of age. He was clerk to M. Ragionato, and godson of Count Algarotti, a sister of whom had married M. Dandolo's brother. Charles, said M. Dandolo to me, has lost his father and his mother, and I feel satisfied that his godfather will guarantee the dowry brought by his wife. I have spoken to him, and I believe him disposed to marry an honest girl whose dowry would enable him to purchase M. Ragionato's office. It seems to promise very well, but I cannot decide until I have seen him. I have invited him to dine with us tomorrow. The young man came, and I found him worthy of all M. Dandolo's praise. We became friends at once. He had some taste for poetry. I read some of my productions to him, and having paid him a visit the following day, he shewed me several pieces of his own composition, which were well written. He introduced me to his aunt, in whose house he lived with his sister, and I was much pleased with their friendly welcome. Being alone with him in his room, I asked him what he thought of love. I do not care for love, he answered, but I should like to get married in order to have a house of my own. When I returned to the palace, I told M. Dandolo that he might open the affair with Count Algarotti, and the count mentioned it to Charles, who said that he could not give any answer, either one way or the other, until he should have seen the young girl, talked with her, and inquired about her reputation. As for Count Algarotti, he was ready to be answerable for his godson, that is, to guarantee 4,000 ducats to the wife, providing her dowry was worth that amount. These were the only preliminaries. The rest belonged to my province. Dandolo informed Charles that the matter was entirely in my hands. He called on me, and inquired when I would be kind enough to introduce him to the young person. I named the day, adding that it was necessary to devote a whole day to the visit, as she resided at a distance of 20 miles from Venice, that we would dine with her and return the same evening. He promised to be ready for me by daybreak. I immediately sent an express to the curate to inform him of the day on which I would call with a friend of mine whom I wished to introduce to his niece. On the appointed day Charles was punctual. I took care to let him know along the road that I had made the acquaintance of the young girl and her uncle as travelling companions from Venice to Mestra about 1 month before, and that I would have offered myself as a husband if I had been in a position to guarantee the dowry of 4,000 ducats. I did not think it necessary to go any further in my confidences. We arrived at the good priest's house 2 hours before midday, and soon after our arrival Christine came in with an air of great ease, expressing all her pleasure at seeing me. She only bowed to Charles, inquiring from me whether he was likewise a clerk. Charles answered that he was a clerk at Ragionato. She pretended to understand, in order not to appear ignorant. "I want you to look at my writing," she said to me, "and afterwards we will go to see my mother." Delighted at the praise bestowed upon her writing by Charles, when he heard that she had learned only 1 month, she invited us to follow her. Charles asked her why she had waited until the age of 19 to study writing. "Well, sir, what does it matter to you? Besides, I must tell you I am 17 and not 19 years of age." Charles entreated her to excuse him, smiling at the quickness of her answer. She was dressed like a simple country girl, yet very neatly, and she wore her handsome gold chains around her neck and on her arms. I told her to take my arm and that of Charles, which she did, casting towards me a look of loving obedience. We went to her mother's house. The good woman was compelled to keep to her bed, owing to sciatica. As we entered the room, a respectable-looking man, who was seated near the patient, rose at the sight of Charles and embraced him affectionately. I heard that he was the family physician, and the circumstance pleased me much. After we paid our compliments to the good woman, the doctor inquired after Charles's aunt and sister, and alluding to the sister who was suffering from a secret disease, Charles desired to say a few words to him in private. They left the room together. Being alone with the mother and Christine, I praised Charles, his excellent conduct, his high character, his business abilities, and extolled the happiness of the woman who would be his wife. They both confirmed my praises by saying that everything I said of him could be read on his features. I had no time to lose, so I told Christine to be on her guard during dinner, as Charles might possibly be the husband whom God had intended for her. "For me?" "Yes, for you. Charles is one of 1,000. You would be much happier with him than you could be with me. The doctor knows him, and you could ascertain from him everything which I cannot find time to tell you now about my friend." The reader can imagine all I suffered in making this declaration, and my surprise when I saw the young girl calm and perfectly composed. Her composure dried the tears already gathering in my eyes. After a short silence, she asked me whether I was certain that such a handsome young man would have her. The question gave me an insight into Christine's heart and feelings, and I quieted all my sorrow, for I saw that I had not known her well. I answered that, beautiful as she was, there was no doubt of her being loved by everybody. "It will be at dinner, my dear Christine, that my friend will examine and study you. Do not fail to show all the charms and qualities with which God has endowed you, but do not let him suspect our intimacy." "It is all very strange. Is my uncle informed of this wonderful change?" "No." "If your friend should feel pleased with me, when would he marry me?" "Within 10 days. I will take care of everything, and you will see me again in the course of the week." Charles came back with the doctor, and Christine, leaving her mother's bedside, took a chair opposite to us. She answered very sensibly all the questions addressed to her by Charles, often exciting his mirth by her artlessness, but not showing any silliness. "Oh, charming simplicity, offspring of wit and ignorance! Thy charm is delightful, and thou alone hast the privilege of saying anything without ever giving offence. But how unpleasant thou art when thou art not natural, and thou art the masterpiece of art when thou art imitated with perfection." We dined rather late, and I took care not to speak to Christine, not even to look at her, so as not to engross her attention, which she devoted entirely to Charles, and I was delighted to see with what ease and interest she kept up the conversation. After dinner, as we were taking leave, I heard the following words uttered by Charles, which went to my very heart: "You are made, lovely Christine, to minister to the happiness of a prince." And Christine? This was her answer: "I should esteem myself fortunate, sir, if you should judge me worthy of ministering to yours." These words excited Charles so much that he embraced me. Christine was simple, but her artlessness did not come from her mind, only from her heart. The simplicity of mind is nothing but silliness, that of the heart is only ignorance and innocence. It is a quality which subsists even when the cause has ceased to be. This young girl, almost a child of nature, was simple in her manners, but graceful in 1,000 trifling ways which cannot be described. She was sincere because she did not know that to conceal some of our impressions is one of the precepts of propriety, and as her intentions were pure, she was a stranger to that false shame and mock modesty which cause pretended innocence to blush at a word, or at a movement said, or made very often without any wicked purpose. During our journey back to Venice, Charles spoke of nothing but of his happiness. He had decidedly fallen in love. "I will call tomorrow morning upon Count Algarotti," he said to me, "and you may write to the priest to come with all the necessary documents to make the contract of marriage which I long to sign." His delight and surprise were intense when I told him that my wedding present to Christine was a dispensation from the Pope for her to be married in Lent. "Then," he exclaimed, "we must go full speed ahead." In the conference which was held the next day between my young substitute, his godfather, and M. Dandolo, it was decided that the parson should be invited to come with his niece. I undertook to carry the message, and leaving Venice 2 hours before morning, I reached P early. The priest said that he would be ready to start immediately after mass. I then called on Christine, and I treated her to a fatherly and sentimental sermon, every word of which was intended to point out to her the true road to happiness in the new condition which she was on the point of adopting. I told her how she ought to behave towards her husband, towards his aunt and his sister, in order to captivate their esteem and their love. The last part of my discourse was pathetic and rather disparaging to myself, for, as I enforced upon her the necessity of being faithful to her husband, I was necessarily led to entreat her pardon for having seduced her. "When you promised to marry me, after we had both been weak enough to give way to our love, did you intend to deceive me?" "Certainly not." "Then you have not deceived me. On the contrary, I owe you some gratitude for having thought that, if our union should prove unhappy, it was better to find another husband for me, and I thank God that you have succeeded so well. Tell me now, what could I answer to your friend in case he should ask me, during the first night, why am I so different to what a virgin ought to be?" It is not likely that Charles, who is full of reserve and propriety, would ask you such a thing, but if he should, tell him positively that you have never had a lover, and that you do not suppose yourself to be different to any other girl. Will he believe me? He would deserve your contempt, and entail punishment on himself if he did not. But dismiss all anxiety, that will not occur. A sensible man, my dear Christine, when he has been rightly brought up, never ventures upon such a question, because he is not only certain to displease, but also sure that he will never know the truth, for if the truth is likely to injure a woman in the opinion of her husband, she would be very foolish indeed to confess it. "I understand your meaning perfectly, my dear friend. Let us, then, embrace each other for the last time." "No, for we are alone, and I am very weak. I adore thee as much as ever." "Do not cry, dear friend, for, truly speaking, I have no wish for it." That simple and candid answer changed my disposition suddenly, and instead of crying I began to laugh. Christine dressed herself splendidly, and after breakfast we left P. We reached Venice in 4 hours. I lodged them at a good inn, and going to the palace, I told M. Dandolo that our people had arrived, and it would be his province to bring them and Charles together on the following day, and to attend to the matter altogether, because the honour of the future husband and wife, the respect due to their parents and to propriety, forbade any further interference on my part. He understood my reasons, and acted accordingly. He brought Charles to me, and I presented both of them to the curate and his niece, then left them to complete their business. I heard afterwards from M. Dandolo that they had all called upon Count Algarotti, and at the office of a notary, where the contract of marriage was signed, and that, after fixing a day for the wedding, Charles had escorted his intended back to P. On his return, Charles paid me a visit. He told me that Christine had won by her beauty and pleasing manners the affection of his aunt, of his sister, and of his godfather, and that they had taken upon themselves all the expense of the wedding. "We intend to be married," he added, "on such a day at P, and I trust that you will crown your work of kindness by being present at the ceremony." I tried to excuse myself, but he insisted with such a feeling of gratitude and with so much earnestness that I was compelled to accept. I listened with pleasure to the account he gave me of the impression produced upon all his family and upon Count Algarotti by the beauty, the artlessness, the rich toilet, and especially by the simple talk of the lovely country girl. "I am deeply in love with her," Charles said to me, "and I feel that it is to you that I shall be indebted for the happiness I am sure to enjoy with my charming wife. She will soon get rid of her country way of talking in Venice, because here envy and slander will but too easily show her the absurdity of it." His enthusiasm and happiness delighted me, and I congratulated myself upon my work. Yet I felt inwardly some jealousy, and I could not help envying a lot which I might have kept for myself. M. d'Aredolo and M. Barbaro having also been invited by Charles, I went with them to P. We found the dinner table laid out in the rector's house by the servants of Count Algarotti, who was acting as Charles's father, and having taken upon himself all the expense of the wedding, had sent his cook and his major domo to P. When I saw Christine, the tears filled my eyes, and I had to leave the room. She was dressed as a country girl, but looked as lovely as a nymph. Her husband, her uncle, and Count Algarotti had vainly tried to make her adopt the Venetian costume, but she had wisely refused. "As soon as I am your wife," she said to Charles, "I will dress as you please, but here I will not appear before my young companions in any other costume than the one in which they have always seen me. I shall thus avoid being laughed at and accused of pride by the girls among whom I have been brought up." There was in these words something so noble, so just, and so generous, that Charles thought his sweetheart a supernatural being. He told me that he had inquired, from the woman with whom Christine had spent a fortnight, about the offers of marriage she had refused at that time, and that he had been much surprised, for 2 of those offers were excellent ones. "Christine," he added, "was evidently destined by heaven for my happiness, and to you I am indebted for the precious possession of that treasure." His gratitude pleased me, and I must render myself the justice of saying that I entertained no thought of abusing it. I felt happy in the happiness I had thus given. We repaired to the church towards 11 o'clock, and were very much astonished at the difficulty we were experiencing in getting in. A large number of the nobility of Treviso, curious to ascertain whether it was true that the marriage ceremony of a country girl would be publicly performed during Lent, when, by waiting only 1 month, a dispensation would have been useless, had come to P. Everyone wondered at the permission having been obtained from the Pope. Everyone imagined that there was some extraordinary reason for it, and was in despair because it was impossible to guess that reason. In spite of all the feelings of envy, every face beamed with pleasure and satisfaction when the young couple made their appearance, and no one could deny that they deserved that extraordinary distinction, an exception to all established rules. A certain Countess of Tos, from Treviso, Christine's godmother, went up to her after the ceremony and embraced her most tenderly, complaining that the happy event had not been communicated to her in Treviso. Christine, in her artless way, answered with as much modesty as sweetness that the countess ought to forgive her if she had failed in her duty towards her, on account of her marriage having been decided on so hastily. She presented her husband, and begged Count Algarotti to atone for her error towards her godmother by inviting her to join the wedding repast, an invitation which the countess accepted with great pleasure. That behaviour, which is usually the result of a good education and a long experience in society, was, in the lovely peasant girl, due only to a candid and well-balanced mind, which shone all the more because it was all nature and not art. As they returned from the church, Charles and Christine knelt before the young wife's mother, who gave them her blessings with tears of joy. Dinner was served, and, of course, Christine and her happy spouse took the seats of honour. Mine was the last, and I was very glad of it, but although everything was delicious, I ate very little, and scarcely opened my lips. Christine was constantly busy, saying pretty things to every one of her guests, and looking at her husband to make sure that he was pleased with her. Once or twice she addressed his aunt and sister in such a gracious manner that they could not help leaving their places and kissing her tenderly, congratulating Charles upon his good fortune. I was seated not far from Count Algarotti, and I heard him say several times to Christine's godmother that he had never felt so delighted in his life. When 4 o'clock struck, Charles whispered a few words to his lovely wife, and she bowed to her godmother, and everybody arose from the table. After the usual compliments, and in this case they bore the stamp of sincerity, the bride distributed among all the girls of the village, who were in the adjoining room, packets full of sugar plums which had been prepared beforehand, and she took leave of them, kissing them all without any pride. Count Algarotti invited all the guests to sleep at a house he had in Treviso, and to partake there of the dinner usually given during the day after the wedding. The uncle alone excused himself, and the mother could not come owing to her disease which prevented her from moving. The good woman died 3 months after Christine's marriage. Christine therefore left her village to follow her husband, and for the remainder of their lives they lived together in mutual happiness. Count Algarotti, Christine's godmother, and my 2 noble friends went away together. The bride and bridegroom had, of course, a carriage to themselves, and I kept the aunt and sister of Charles company in another. I could not help envying the happy man somewhat, although in my inmost heart I felt pleased with his happiness. The sister was not without merit. She was a young widow of 25, and still deserved the homage of men. But I gave the preference to the aunt, who told me that her new niece was a treasure, a jewel which was worthy of everybody's admiration, but that she would not let her go into society until she spoke the Venetian dialect well. Her cheerful spirits, she added, her artless simplicity, her natural wit, are like her beauty. They must be dressed in the Venetian fashion. We are highly pleased with my nephew's choice, and he has incurred everlasting obligations towards you. I hope that for the future you will consider our house as your own. The invitation was polite, perhaps it was sincere, yet I did not avail myself of it, and they were glad of it. At the end of 1 year, Christine presented her husband with a living token of their mutual love, and that circumstance increased their conjugal felicity. We all found comfortable quarters in the count's house in Treviso, where, after partaking of some refreshments, the guests retired to rest. The next morning I was with Count Algarotti and my 2 friends, when Charles came in, handsome, bright, and radiant. While he was answering with much wit some jokes of the count, I kept looking at him with some anxiety, but he came up to me and embraced me warmly. I confess that a kiss never made me happier. People wonder at the devout scoundrels who call upon their saint when they think themselves in need of heavenly assistance, or who thank him when they imagine that they have obtained some favour from him. But people are wrong, for it is good and right feeling which preaches against atheism. At the invitation of Charles, his aunt and sister had gone to pay a morning visit to the young wife, and they returned with her. Happiness never shone on a more lovely face. Monsieur Algarotti, going towards her, inquired from her affectionately whether she had had a good night. Her only answer was to rush to her husband's arms. It was the most artless, and at the same time the most eloquent answer she could possibly give. Then, turning her beautiful eyes towards me, and offering me her hand, she said, "Monsieur Casanova, I am happy, and I love to be indebted to you for my happiness." The tears which were flowing from my eyes as I kissed her hand told her better than words how truly happy I was myself. The dinner passed off delightfully. We then left for Mestre and Venice. We escorted the married couple to their house, and returned home to amuse Monsieur Bragadin with the relation of our expedition. This worthy and particularly learned man said 1,000 things about the marriage, some of great profundity, and others of great absurdity. I laughed inwardly. I was the only one who had the key to the mystery, and
Chapter 20, Part 1 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 5. Milan and Mantua. Chapter 20, Part 1. On Low Sunday, Charles paid us a visit with his lovely wife, who seemed totally indifferent to what Christine used to be. Her hair dressed with powder did not please me as well as the raven black of her beautiful locks, and her fashionable town attire did not, in my eyes, suit her as well as her rich country dress. But the countenances of husband and wife bore the stamp of happiness. Charles reproached me in a friendly manner because I had not called once upon them, and, in order to atone for my apparent negligence, I went to see them the next day with Monsieur Dandolo. Charles told me that his wife was idolized by his aunt and his sister, who had become her bosom friend; that she was kind, affectionate, unassuming, and of a disposition which enforced affection. I was no less pleased with this favourable state of things than with the facility with which Christine was learning the Venetian dialect. When Monsieur Dandolo and I called at their house, Charles was not at home. Christine was alone with his two relatives. The most friendly welcome was proffered to us, and in the course of conversation the aunt praised the progress made by Christine in her writing very highly, and asked her to let me see her copybook. I followed her to the next room, where she told me that she was very happy, that every day she discovered new virtues in her husband. He had told her, without the slightest appearance of suspicion or displeasure, that he knew that we'd spent 2 days together in Treviso, and that he had laughed at the well-meaning fool who had given him that piece of information in the hope of raising a cloud in the heaven of their felicity. Charles was truly endowed with all the virtues, with all the noble qualities of an honest and distinguished man. 26 years afterwards I happened to require the assistance of his purse, and found him my true friend. I never was a frequent visitor at his house, and he appreciated my delicacy. He died a few months before my last departure from Venice, leaving his widow in easy circumstances, and 3 well-educated sons, all with good positions, who may, for what I know, be still living with their mother. In June I went to the fair at Padua, and made the acquaintance of a young man of my own age, who was then studying mathematics under the celebrated Professor Succi. His name was Toniolo, but thinking it did not sound well, he changed it for that of Fabri. He became in after years Comte de Fabri, Lieutenant-General under Joseph II, and died Governor of Transylvania. This man, who owed his high fortune to his talents, would perhaps have lived and died unknown if he had kept his name of Toniolo, a truly vulgar one. He was from Uderzo, a large village of the Venetian Friuli. He had a brother in the church, a man of parts, and a great gamester, who, having a deep knowledge of the world, had taken the name of Fabri, and the younger brother had to assume it likewise. Soon afterwards he bought an estate with the title of Count, became a Venetian nobleman, and his origin as a country bumpkin was forgotten. If he had kept his name of Toniolo, it would have injured him, for he could not have pronounced it without reminding his hearers of what is called, by the most contemptible of prejudices, low extraction, and the privileged class, through an absurd error, does not admit the possibility of a peasant having talent or genius. No doubt a time will come when society, more enlightened, and therefore more reasonable, will acknowledge that noble feelings, honour, and heroism can be found in every condition of life as easily as in a class the blood of which is not always exempt from the taint of a misalliance. The new Count, while he allowed others to forget his origin, was too wise to forget it himself, and in legal documents he always signed his family name as well as the one he had adopted. His brother had offered him 2 ways to win fortune in the world, leaving him perfectly free in his choice. Both required an expenditure of 1,000 sequins, but the abbé had put the amount aside for that purpose. My friend had to choose between the sword of Mars and the bird of Minerva. The abbé knew that he could purchase for his brother a company in the army of his imperial and apostolic majesty, or obtain for him a professorship at the University of Padua, for money can do everything. But my friend, who was gifted with noble feelings and good sense, knew that in either profession talents and knowledge were essentials, and before making a choice he was applying himself with great success to the study of mathematics. He ultimately decided upon the military profession, thus imitating Achilles, who preferred the sword to the distaff, and he paid for it with his life, like the son of Peleus, though not so young, and not through a wound inflicted by an arrow, but from the plague, which he caught in the unhappy country in which the indolence of Europe allows the Turks to perpetuate that fearful disease. The distinguished appearance, the noble sentiments, the great knowledge, and the talents of Fabris would have been turned into ridicule in a man called Tognolo, for such is the force of prejudices, particularly of those which have no ground to rest upon, that an ill-sounding name is degrading in this our stupid society. My opinion is that men who have an ill-sounding name, or one which presents an indecent or ridiculous idea, are right in changing it, if they intend to win honor, fame, and fortune, either in arts or sciences. No one can reasonably deny them that right, provided the name they assume belongs to nobody. The alphabet is general property, and every one has the right to use it for the creation of a word forming an appellative sound. But he must truly create it. Voltaire, in spite of his genius, would not perhaps have reached posterity under his name of Arouet, especially amongst the French, who always give way so easily to their keen sense of ridicule and equivocation. How could they have imagined that a writer, Arouet, could be a man of genius? And d'Alembert, would he have attained his high fame, his universal reputation, if he had been satisfied with his name of Monsieur le Rond, or Mr. All-Round? What would have become of Metastasio under his true name of Trapasso? What impression would Melanchthon have made with his name of Schwarzert? Would he then have dared to raise the voice of a moralist philosopher, of a reformer of the Eucharist, and so many other holy things? Would not Monsieur de Beauharnais have caused some persons to laugh and others to blush if he had kept his name of Beauvais, even if the first founder of his family had been indebted for his fortune to the fine quality expressed by that name? Would the Bourbeux have made as good a figure on the throne as the Bourbons? I think that King Poniatowski ought to have abdicated the name of Augustus, which he had taken at the time of his accession to the throne, when he abdicated royalty. The Colleoni of Bergamo, however, would find it rather difficult to change their name, because they would be compelled at the same time to change their coat of arms, the two generative glands, and thus to annihilate the glory of their ancestor, the hero Bartolomeo. Towards the end of autumn my friend Fabris introduced me to a family in the midst of which the mind and the heart could find delicious food. That family resided in the country on the road to Zero. Card-playing, love-making, and practical jokes were the order of the day. Some of those jokes were rather severe ones, but the order of the day was never to get angry and to laugh at everything, for one was to take every jest pleasantly or be thought a bore. Bedsteads would at night tumble down under their occupants, ghosts were personated, diuretic pills or sugar-plums were given to young ladies, as well as comfits who produced certain winds rising from the Netherlands, and impossible to keep under control. These jokes would sometimes go rather too far, but such was the spirit animating all the members of that circle. They would laugh. I was not less inured than the others to the war of offence and defence, but at last there was such a bitter joke played upon me that it suggested to me another, the fatal consequences of which put a stop to the mania by which we were all possessed. We were in the habit of walking to a farm which was about half a league distant by the road, but the distance could be reduced by half by going over a deep and miry ditch across which a narrow plank was thrown, and I always insisted upon going that way, in spite of the fright of the ladies who always trembled on the narrow bridge, although I never failed to cross the first and to offer my hand to help them over. One fine day I crossed first so as to give them courage, but suddenly, when I reached the middle of the plank, it gave way under me, and there I was in the ditch, up to the chin in stinking mud, and, in spite of my inward rage, obliged, according to the general understanding, to join in the merry laughter of all my companions. But the merriment did not last long, for the joke was too bad, and every one declared it to be so. Some peasants were called to the rescue, and with much difficulty they dragged me out in the most awful state. An entirely new dress embroidered with spangles, my silk stockings, my lace, Everything was of course spoiled. But not minding it, I laughed more heartily than anybody else, although I had already made an inward vow to have the most cruel revenge. In order to know the author of that bitter joke, I had only to appear calm and indifferent about it. It was evident that the plank had been purposely sawn. I was taken back to the house. A shirt, a coat, a complete costume were lent me, for I had come that time only for 24 hours, and had not brought anything with me. I went to the city the next morning, and towards the evening I returned to the gay company. Fabry, who had been as angry as myself, observed to me that the perpetrator of the joke evidently felt his guilt, because he took good care not to discover himself. But I unveiled the mystery by promising 1 sequin to a peasant woman if she could find out who had sawn the plank. She contrived to discover the young man who had done the work. I called on him, and the offer of a sequin, together with my threats, compelled him to confess that he had been paid for his work by Signor Demetrio, a Greek, dealer in spices, a good and amiable man of between 45 and 50 years, on whom I never played any trick except in the case of a pretty young servant girl whom he was courting and whom I had juggled from him. Satisfied with my discovery, I was racking my brain to invent a good practical joke, but to obtain complete revenge it was necessary that my trick should prove worse than the one he had played upon me. Unfortunately, my imagination was at bay. I could not find anything. A funeral put an end to my difficulties. Armed with my hunting knife, I went alone to the cemetery a little after midnight, and opening the grave of the dead man who had been buried that very day, I cut off one of the arms near the shoulder, not without some trouble, and after I had reburied the corpse, I returned to my room with the arm of the defunct. The next day, when supper was over, I left the table and retired to my chamber as if I intended to go to bed, but taking the arm with me, I hid myself under Demetrio's bed. A short time after, the Greek comes in, undresses himself, puts his light out, and lies down. I give him time to fall nearly asleep. Then, placing myself at the foot of the bed, I pull away the clothes little by little until he is half naked. He laughs and calls out, "Whoever you may be, go away and let me sleep quietly, for I do not believe in ghosts." He covers himself again and composes himself to sleep. I wait 5 or 6 minutes and pull again at the bedclothes, but when he tries to draw up the sheet, saying that he does not care for ghosts, I oppose some resistance. He sits up so as to catch the hand which is pulling at the clothes, and I take care that he should get hold of the dead hand. Confident that he has caught the man or the woman who was playing the trick, he pulls it towards him, laughing all the time. I keep tight hold of the arm for a few instants, and then let it go suddenly. The Greek falls back on his pillow without uttering a single word. The trick was played. I leave the room without any noise, and, reaching my chamber, go to bed. I was fast asleep when towards morning I was awoke by persons going about, and not understanding why they should be up so early, I got up. The first person I met, the mistress of the house, told me that I had played an abominable joke. "I? What have I done?" "Monsieur Demetrio is dying." "Have I killed him?" She went away without answering me. I dressed myself, rather frightened, I confess, but determined upon pleading a complete ignorance of everything, and I proceeded to Demetrio's room. And I was confronted with horror-stricken countenances and bitter reproaches. I found all the guests around him. I protested my innocence, but everyone smiled. The archpriest and the beadle, who had just arrived, would not bury the arm which was lying there, and they told me that I had been guilty of a great crime. "I am astonished, reverend sir," I said to the priest, "at the hasty judgment which is thus passed upon me, when there is no proof to condemn me." "You have done it," exclaimed all the guests. "You alone are capable of such an abomination. It is just like you. No one but you would have dared to do such a thing." "I am compelled," said the archpriest, "to draw up an official report." "As you please, I have not the slightest objection," I answered. "I have nothing to fear." And I left the room. I continued to take it coolly, and at the dinner table I was informed that Monsieur Demetrio had been bled, that he had recovered the use of his eyes, but not of his tongue or of his limbs. The next day he could speak, and I heard, after I had taken leave of the family, that he was stupid and spasmodic. The poor man remained in that painful state for the rest of his life. I felt deeply grieved, but I had not intended to injure him so badly. I thought that the trick he had played upon me might have cost my life, and I could not help deriving consolation from that idea. On the same day the archpriest made up his mind to have the arm buried, and to send a formal denunciation against me to the episcopal chancellorship of Treviso. Annoyed at the reproaches which I received on all sides, I returned to Venice. A fortnight afterwards I was summoned to appear before the Magistrato alla Blasfemia. I begged M. Barbaro to enquire the cause of the aforesaid summons, for it was a formidable court. I was surprised at the proceedings being taken against me, as if there had been a certainty of my having desecrated a grave, whilst there could be nothing but suspicion. But I was mistaken. The summons was not relating to that affair. M. Barbaro informed me in the evening that a woman had brought a complaint against me for having violated her daughter. She stated in her complaint that, having decoyed her child to the Zuecca, I had abused her by violence, and she adduced as a proof that her daughter was confined to her bed, owing to the bad treatment she had received from me in my endeavours to ravish her. It was one of those complaints which are often made in order to give trouble and to cause expense, even against innocent persons. I was innocent of violation, but it was quite true that I had given the girl a sound thrashing. I prepared my defence, and begged M. Barbaro to deliver it to the magistrate's secretary. Declaration. I hereby declare that, on such a day, having met the woman with her daughter, I accosted them, and offered to give them some refreshments at a coffee-house near by; that the daughter refused to accept my caresses, and that the mother said to me, "My daughter is yet a virgin, and she is quite right not to lose her maidenhood without making a good profit by it." "If so," I answered, "I will give you 10 sequins for her virginity." "You may judge for yourself," said the mother. Having assured myself of the fact by the assistance of the sense of feeling, and having ascertained that it might be true, I told the mother to bring the girl in the afternoon to the Zuecca, and that I would give her the 10 sequins. My offer was joyfully accepted. The mother brought her daughter to me, she received the money, and leaving us together in the garden of the Cross, she went away. When I tried to avail myself of the right for which I had paid, the girl, most likely trained to the business by her mother, contrived to prevent me. At first the game amused me, but at last, being tired of it, I told her to have done. She answered quietly that it was not her fault if I was not able to do what I wanted. Vexed and annoyed, I placed her in such a position that she found herself at bay, but, making a violent effort, she managed to change her position, and debarred me from making any further attempts. "Why," I said to her, "did you move?" "Because I would not have it in that position." "You would not?" "No." Without more ado I got hold of a broomstick, and gave her a good lesson in order to get something for the 10 sequins which I had been foolish enough to pay in advance. But I have broken none of her limbs, and I took care to apply my blows only on her posteriors, on which spot I have no doubt that all the marks may be seen. In the evening I made her dress herself again, and sent her back in a boat which chanced to pass, and she was landed in safety. The mother received 10 sequins, the daughter has kept her hateful maidenhood, and, if I am guilty of anything, it is only of having given a thrashing to an infamous girl, the pupil of her still more infamous mother. My declaration had no effect. The magistrate was acquainted with the girl, and the mother laughed at having duped me so easily. I was summoned, but did not appear before the court, and a writ was on the point of being issued against my body, when the complaint of the profanation of a grave was filed against me before the same magistrate. It would have been less serious for me if the second affair had been carried before the Council of 10, because one court might have saved me from the other. The second crime, which, after all, was only a joke, was high felony in the eyes of the clergy, and a great deal was made of it. I was summoned to appear within 24 hours, and it was evident that I would be arrested immediately afterwards. Monsieur de Bragadin, who always gave good advice, told me that the best way to avoid the threatening storm was to run away. The advice was certainly wise, and I lost no time in getting ready. I have never left Venice with so much regret as I did then, for I had some pleasant intrigues on hand, and I was very lucky at cards. My 3 friends assured me that, within 1 year at the furthest, the cases against me would be forgotten, and in Venice, when public opinion has forgotten anything, it can be easily arranged. I left Venice in the evening, and the next day I slept at Verona. 2 days afterwards I reached Mantua. I was alone, with plenty of clothes and jewels, without letters of introduction, but with a well-filled purse, enjoying excellent health and my 23 years. In Mantua I ordered an excellent dinner, the very first thing one ought to do at a large hotel, and after dinner I went out for a walk. In the evening, after I had seen the coffee-houses and the places of resort, I went to the theatre, and I was delighted to see Marina appear on the stage as a comic dancer, amid the greatest applause, which she deserved, for she danced beautifully. She was tall, handsome, very well made, and very graceful. I immediately resolved on renewing my acquaintance with her, if she happened to be free, and after the opera I engaged a boy to take me to her house. She had just sat down to supper with someone, but the moment she saw me, she threw her napkin down and flew to my arms. I returned her kisses, judging by her warmth that her guest was a man of no consequence. The servant, without waiting for orders, had already laid a plate for me, and Marina invited me to sit down near her. I felt vexed, because the aforesaid individual had not risen to salute me, and before I accepted Marina's invitation I asked her who the gentleman was, begging her to introduce me. "This gentleman," she said, "is Count Celi, of Rome. He is my lover." "I congratulate you," I said to her, and turning towards the so-called Count, "Sir," I added, "do not be angry at our mutual affection. Marina is my daughter." "She is a prostitute." "True," said Marina, "and you can believe the Count, for he is my procurer." At those words the brute threw his knife at her face, but she avoided it by running away. The scoundrel followed her, but I drew my sword and said, "Stop, or you are a dead man." I immediately asked Marina to order her servant to light me out, but she hastily put a cloak on, and taking my arm she entreated me to take her with me. "With pleasure," I said. The Count then invited me to meet him alone on the following day at the Casino of Pomi, to hear what he had to say. "Very well, sir, at 4 in the afternoon," I answered. I took Marina to my inn, where I lodged her in the room adjoining mine, and we sat down to supper. Marina, seeing that I was thoughtful, said, "Are you sorry to have saved me from the rage of that brute?" "No, I am glad to have done so. But tell me truly who and what he is." "He is a gambler by profession, and gives himself out as Count Celi. I made his acquaintance here. He courted me, invited me to supper, played after supper, and, having won a large sum from an Englishman whom he had decoyed to his supper by telling him that I would be present, he gave me 50 guineas, saying that he had given me an interest in his bank. As soon as I become his mistress, he insisted upon my being compliant with all the men he wanted to make his dupes, and at last he took up his quarters at my lodgings. The welcome I gave you very likely vexed him, and you know the rest. Here I am, and here I will remain until my departure from Mantua, where I have an engagement as first dancer. My servant will bring me all I need for tonight, and I will give him orders to move all my luggage tomorrow. I will not see that scoundrel any more. I will be only yours, if you are free as in Corfu, and if you love me still." "Yes, my dear Marina, I do love you, but if you wish to be my mistress, you must be only mine." "Oh, of course. I have 300 sequins, and I will give them to you tomorrow, if you will take me as your mistress." "I do not want any money. All I want is yourself. Well, it is all arranged. Tomorrow evening we shall feel more comfortable." "Perhaps you are thinking of a duel for tomorrow. But do not imagine such a thing, dearest. I know that man. He is an arrant coward." "I must keep my engagement with him." "I know that, but he will not keep his, and I am very glad of it." Changing the conversation, and speaking of our old acquaintances, she informed me that she had quarrelled with her brother Petronio, that her sister was prima donna in Genoa, and that Bellino Thérèse was still in Naples, where she continued to ruin dukes. She concluded by saying, "I am the most unhappy of the family." "How so? You are beautiful, and you have become an excellent dancer. Do not be so prodigal of your favours, and you cannot fail to meet with a man who will take care of your fortune." "To be sparing of my favours is very difficult. When I love, I am no longer mine, but when I do not love, I cannot be amiable. Well, dearest, I could be very happy with you." "Dear Marina, I am not wealthy, and my honour would not allow me." "Hold your tongue, I understand you." "Why have you not a lady's maid with you, instead of a male servant?" "You are right, a maid would look more respectable, but my servant is so clever and so faithful." "I can guess all his Chapter 20, Part 2 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 5, Milan and Mantua. Chapter 20, Part 2. The next day after dinner I left Marina, getting ready for the theatre, and having put everything of value I possessed in my pocket, I took a carriage and proceeded to the Casino of Pomi. I felt confident of disabling the false count, and sent the carriage away. I was conscious of being guilty of great folly in exposing my life with such an adversary. I might have broken my engagement with him without implicating my honour, but the fact is that I felt well disposed for a fight, and, as I was certainly in the right, I thought the prospect of a duel very delightful. A visit to a dancer, a brute professing to be a nobleman, who insults her in my presence, who wants to kill her, who allows her to be carried off in his very teeth, and whose only opposition is to give me an appointment. It seemed to me that if I had failed to come, I should have given him the right to call me a coward. The Count had not yet arrived. I entered the coffee-room to wait for him. I met a good-looking Frenchman there, and I addressed him. Being pleased with his conversation, I told him that I expected the arrival of a man, and that as my honour required that he should find me alone, I would feel grateful if he would go away as soon as I saw the man approaching. A short time afterwards I saw my adversary coming along, but with a second. I then told the Frenchman that he would oblige me by remaining, and he accepted as readily as if I had invited him to a party of pleasure. The Count came in with his follower, who was sporting a sword at least 40 inches long, and had all the look of a cutthroat. I advanced towards the Count, and said to him dryly, "You told me that you would come alone." "My friend will not be in the way, as I only want to speak to you." "If I had known that, I would not have gone out of my way. But do not let us be noisy, and let us go to some place where we can exchange a few words without being seen. Follow me." I left the coffee-room with the young Frenchman, who, being well acquainted with the place, took me to the most favourable spot, and we waited there for the 2 other champions, who were walking slowly and talking together. When they were within 10 paces, I drew my sword and called upon my adversary to get ready. My Frenchman had already taken out his sword, but he kept it under his arm. 2 to 1! exclaimed Celi. "Send your friend away, and this gentleman will go likewise. At all events, your friend wears a sword, therefore we are 2 against 2. "Yes," said the Frenchman, "let us have a 4-handed game." "I do not cross swords with a dancer," said the cutthroat. He had scarcely uttered those words when my friend, going up to him, told him that a dancer was certainly as good as a blackleg, and gave him a violent blow with the flat of his sword on the face. I followed his example with Celi, who began to beat a retreat, and said that he only wanted to tell me something, and that he would fight afterwards. "Well, speak." "You know me, and I do not know you. Tell me who you are." My only answer was to resume laying my sword upon the scoundrel, while the Frenchman was showing the same dexterity upon the back of his companion. But the 2 cowards took to their heels, and there was nothing for us to do but to sheathe our weapons. Thus did the duel end in a manner even more amusing than Marina herself had anticipated. My brave Frenchman was expecting someone at the casino. I left him, after inviting him to supper for that evening after the opera. I gave him the name which I had assumed for my journey and the address of my hotel. I gave Marina a full description of the adventure. "I will," she said, "amuse everybody at the theatre this evening with a story of your meeting. But that which pleases me most is that, if your second is really a dancer, he can be no other than Monsieur Baletti, who is engaged with me for the Mantua theatre." I stored all my valuables in my trunk again, and went to the opera, where I saw Baletti, who recognized me, and pointed me out to all his friends, to whom he was relating the adventure. He joined me after the performance, and accompanied me to the inn. Marina, who had already returned, came to my room as soon as she heard my voice, and I was amused at the surprise of the amiable Frenchman, when he saw the young artist with whom he had engaged to dance the comic parts. Marina, although an excellent dancer, did not like the serious style. Those two handsome adepts of terpsichore had never met before, and they began an amorous warfare which made me enjoy my supper immensely, because, as he was a fellow artist, Marina assumed towards Baletti a tone well adapted to the circumstances, and very different to her usual manner with other men. She shone with wit and beauty that evening, and was in an excellent temper, for she had been much applauded by the public, the true version of the Celli business being already well known. The theatre was to be open only for 10 more nights, and as Marina wished to leave Milan immediately after the last performance, we decided on travelling together. In the meantime I invited Baletti (it was an Italian name which he had adopted for the stage) to be our guest during the remainder of our stay in Milan. The friendship between us had a great influence upon all the subsequent events of my life, as the reader will see in these memoirs. He had great talent as a dancer, but that was the least of his excellent qualities. He was honest, his feelings were noble, he had studied much, and he had received the best education that could be given in those days in France to a nobleman. On the 3rd day I saw plainly that Marina wished to make a conquest of her colleague, and feeling what great advantage might accrue to her from it, I resolved on helping her. She had a post-chaise for 2 persons, and I easily persuaded her to take Baletti with her, saying that I wished to arrive alone in Mantua for several reasons which I could not confide to her. The fact was that if I had arrived with her, people would have naturally supposed that I was a lover, and I wished to avoid that. Baletti was delighted with the proposal. He insisted upon paying his share of the expenses, but Marina would not hear of it. The reasons alleged by the young man for paying his own expenses were excellent ones, and it was with great difficulty that I prevailed upon him to accept Marina's offer, but I ultimately succeeded. I promised to wait for them on the road, so as to take dinner and supper together, and on the day appointed for our departure I left Milan 1 hour before them. Reaching the city of Cremona very early, where we intended to sleep, I took a walk about the streets, and, finding a coffee-house, I went in. I made there the acquaintance of a French officer, and we left the coffee-room together to take a short ramble. A very pretty woman happened to pass in a carriage, and my companion stopped her to say a few words. Their conversation was soon over, and the officer joined me again. "Who is that lovely lady?" I inquired. "She is a truly charming woman, and I can tell you an anecdote about her worthy of being transmitted to posterity. You need not suppose that I am going to exaggerate, for the adventure is known to everybody in Cremona. The charming woman whom you have just seen is gifted with wit greater even than her beauty, and here is a specimen of it. A young officer, one amongst many military men who were courting her when Marshal de Richelieu was commanding in Genoa, boasted of being treated by her with more favour than all the others, and one day, in the very coffee-room where we met, he advised the brother officer not to lose his time in courting her, because he had no chance whatever of obtaining any favour. "My dear fellow," said the other officer, "I have a much better right to give you that piece of advice, for I have already obtained from her everything which can be granted to a lover." I am certain that you are telling a lie, exclaimed the young man, and I request you to follow me out. Most willingly, said the indiscreet swain, but what is the good of ascertaining the truth through a duel, and of cutting our throats, when I can make the lady herself certify the fact in your presence? I bet 25 louis that it is all untrue, said the incredulous officer. I accept your bet. Let us go. The two contending parties proceeded together towards the dwelling of the lady whom you saw just now, who was to name the winner of the 25 louis. They found her in a dressing-room. "Well, gentlemen," she said, "what lucky wind has brought you here together at this hour?" "It is a bet, madam," answered the unbelieving officer, "and you alone can be the umpire in our quarrel. This gentleman has been boasting of having obtained from you everything a woman can grant to the most favored lover. I have given him the lie in the most impressive manner, and a duel was to ensue, when he offered to have the truth of his boast certified by you. I have bet 25 louis that you would not admit it, and he has taken my bet. Now, madam, you can say which of us two is right." "You have lost, sir," she said to him, "but now I beg both of you to quit my house, and I give you fair warning that if you ever dare to show your faces here again, you will be sorry for it." The two heedless fellows went away dreadfully mortified. The unbeliever paid the bet, but he was deeply vexed, called the other a coxcomb, and a week afterwards killed him in a duel. Since that time the lady goes to the casino and continues to mix in society, but does not see company at her own house, and lives in perfect accord with her husband. How did the husband take it all? Quite well, and like an intelligent, sensible man. He said that, if his wife had acted differently, he would have applied for a divorce, because in that case no one would have entertained a doubt of her being guilty. That husband is indeed a sensible fellow. It is certain that, if his wife had given the lie to the indiscreet officer, he would have paid the bet, but he would have stood by what he had said, and everybody would have believed him. By declaring him the winner of the bet, she has cut the matter short, and she has avoided a judgment by which she would have been dishonored. The inconsiderate boaster was guilty of a double mistake, for which he paid the penalty of his life. But his adversary was as much wanting in delicacy, for in such matters rightly minded men do not venture upon betting. If the one who says yes is imprudent, the one who says no is a dupe. I like the lady's presence of mind. But what sentence would you pass on her? Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty. I am of the same opinion, and it has been the verdict of the public likewise, for she has since been treated even better than before the affair. You will see if you go to the casino, and I shall be happy to introduce you to her. I invited the officer to sup with us, and we spent a very pleasant evening. After he had gone, I remarked with pleasure that Marina was capable of observing the rules of propriety. She had taken a bedroom to herself, so as not to hurt the feelings of her respectable fellow-dancer. When I arrived in Mantua, I put up at St. Mark's Hotel. Marina, to whom I had given a notice that my intention was to call on her but seldom, took up her abode in the house assigned to her by the theatrical manager. In the afternoon of the same day, as I was walking about, I went into a bookseller's shop to ascertain whether there was any new work out. I remained there without perceiving that the night had come, and on being told that the shop was going to be closed, I went out. I had only gone a few yards when I was arrested by a patrol, the officer of which told me that, as I had no lantern, and as 8 o'clock had struck, his duty was to take me to the guard-house. It was in vain that I observed that, having arrived only in the afternoon, I could not know that order of the police. I was compelled to follow him. When we reached the guard-house, the officer of the patrol introduced me to his captain, a tall, fine-looking young man, who received me in the most cheerful manner. I begged him to let me return to my hotel, as I needed rest after my journey. He laughed, and answered, "No, indeed, I want you to spend a joyous night with me, and in good company." He told the officer to give me back my sword, and, addressing me again, he said, "I only consider you, my dear sir, as my friend and guest." I could not help being amused at such a novel mode of invitation, and I accepted it. He gave some orders to a German soldier, and soon afterwards the table was laid out for 4 persons. The 2 other officers joined us, and we had a very gay supper. When the dessert had been served, the company was increased by the arrival of 2 disgusting, dissolute females. A green cloth was spread over the table, and one of the officers began a faro bank. I punted so as not to appear unwilling to join the game, and after losing a few sequins I went out to breathe the fresh air, for we had drunk freely. One of the 2 females followed me, teased me, and finally contrived, in spite of myself, to make me a present which condemned me to a regimen of 6 weeks. After that fine exploit I went in again. A young and pleasant officer, who had lost some 15 or 20 sequins, was swearing like a trooper because the banker had pocketed his money and was going. The young officer had a great deal of gold before him on the table, and he contended that the banker ought to have warned him that it would be the last game. "Sir," I said to him politely, "you are in the wrong, for faro is the freest of games. Why do you not take the bank yourself?" "It would be too much trouble, and these gentlemen do not punt high enough for me, but if that sort of thing amuses you, take the bank and I will punt." "Captain," I said, "will you take a 4th share in my bank?" "Willingly." "Gentlemen, I beg you to give notice that I will lay the cards down after 6 games." I asked for new packs of cards, and put 300 sequins on the table. The captain wrote on the back of a card, "Good for 100 sequins, O'Neilan," and placing it with my gold I began my bank. The young officer was delighted, and said to me, "Your bank might be defunct before the end of the 6th game." I did not answer, and the play went on. At the beginning of the 5th game my bank was in the pangs of death. The young officer was in high glee. I rather astonished him by telling him that I was glad to lose, for I thought him a much more agreeable companion when he was winning. There are some civilities which very likely prove unlucky for those to whom they are addressed, and it turned out so in this case, for my compliment turned his brain. During the 5th game a run of adverse cards made him lose all he had won, and, as he tried to do violence to Dame Fortune in the 6th round, he lost every sequin he had. "Sir," he said to me, "you have been very lucky, but I hope you will give me my revenge tomorrow." "It would be with the greatest pleasure, sir, but I never play except when I am under arrest." I counted my money, and found that I had won 250 sequins, besides a debt of 50 sequins due by an officer who played on trust, which Captain O'Neilan took on his own account. I completed his share, and at daybreak he allowed me to go away. As soon as I got to my hotel I went to bed, and when I awoke I had a visit from Captain Laurent, the officer who had played on trust. Thinking that his object was to pay me what he had lost, I told him that O'Neilan had taken his debt on himself, but he answered that he had only called for the purpose of begging of me a loan of 6 sequins on his note of hand, by which he would pledge his honour to repay me within 1 week. I gave him the money, and he begged that the matter might remain between us. "I promise it," I said to him, "but do not break your word." The next day I was ill, and the reader is aware of the nature of my illness. I immediately placed myself under a proper course of diet, however unpleasant it was at my age, but I kept to my system, and it cured me rapidly. 3 or 4 days afterwards Captain O'Neilan called on me, and when I told him the nature of my sickness, he laughed, much to my surprise. "And then you were all right before that night?" he inquired. "Yes, my health was excellent." "I am sorry that you should have lost your health in such an ugly place. I would have warned you if I had thought you had any intentions in that quarter." "Did you know of the woman having—" "Zounds, did I not? It's only a week since I paid a visit to the very same place myself, and I believe the creature was all right before my visit." "Then I have to thank you for the present she has bestowed upon me." "Most likely, but it is only a trifle, and you can easily get cured if you care to take the trouble." "What? Do you not try to cure yourself?" "Faith, no. It would be too much trouble to follow a regular diet, and what is the use of curing such a trifling inconvenience, when I am certain of getting it again in a fortnight? 10 times in my life have I had that patience, but I got tired of it, and for the last 2 years I have resigned myself, and now I put up with it. I pity you, for a man like you would have great success in love. I do not care a fig for love. It requires cares which would bother me much more than the slight inconvenience to which we were alluding, and to which I am used now. I am not of your opinion, for the amorous pleasure is insipid when love does not throw a little spice in it. Do you think, for instance, that the ugly wretch I met at the guard-room is worth what I now suffer on her account? Of course not, and that is why I am sorry for you. If I had known, I could have introduced you to something better. The very best in that line is not worth my health, and health ought to be sacrificed only for love. Oh, you want women worthy of love? There are a few here. Stop with this for some time, and when you are cured there is nothing to prevent you from making conquests. O'Neilan was only 23 years old. His father, who was dead, had been a general, and the beautiful Countess Barsati was his sister. He presented me to the Countess Zanardi Nerli, still more lovely than his sister, but I was prudent enough not to burn my incense before either of them, for it seemed to me that everybody could guess the state of my health. I have never met a young man more addicted to debauchery than O'Neilan. I have often spent the night rambling about with him, and I was amazed at his cynical boldness and impudence. Yet he was noble, generous, brave, and honourable. If in those days young officers were often guilty of so much immorality, of so many vile actions, it was not so much their fault as the fault of the privileges which they enjoyed through custom, indulgence, or party spirit. Here is an example. One day O'Neilan, having drunk rather freely, rides through the city at full speed. A poor old woman, who was crossing the street, has no time to avoid him. She falls, and her head is cut open by the horse's feet. O'Neilan places himself under arrest, but the next day he is set at liberty. He had only to plead that it was an accident. The officer Laurent, not having called upon me to redeem his promissory note of 6 sequins during the week, I told him in the street that I would no longer consider myself bound to keep the affair secret. Instead of excusing himself, he said, "I do not care." The answer was insulting, and I intended to compel him to give me reparation, but the next day O'Neilan told me that Captain Laurent had gone mad and had been locked up in a madhouse. He subsequently recovered his reason, but his conduct was so infamous that he was cashiered. O'Neilan, who was as brave as Bayard, was killed a few years afterwards at the Battle of Prague. A man of his complexion was certain to fall the victim of Mars or of Venus. He might be alive now if he had been endowed only with the courage of the fox, but he had the courage of the lion. It is a virtue in a soldier, but almost a fault in an officer. Those who brave danger with a full knowledge of it are worthy of praise, but those who do not realize it escape only by a miracle, and without any merit attaching itself to them. Yet we must respect those great warriors, for their unconquerable courage is the offspring of a strong soul, of a virtue which places them above ordinary mortals. Whenever I think of Prince Charles de Ligne, I cannot restrain my tears. He was as brave as Achilles, but Achilles was invulnerable. He would be alive now if he had remembered during the fight that he was mortal. Who are they that, having known him, have not shed tears in his memory? He was handsome, kind, polished, learned, a lover of the arts, cheerful, witty in his conversation, a pleasant companion, and a man of perfect equability. Fatal, terrible revolution! A cannon ball took him from his friends, from his family, from the happiness which surrounded him. The Prince de Waldeck has also paid the penalty of his intrepidity with the loss of one arm. It is said that he consoles himself for that loss with the consciousness that with the remaining one he can yet command an army. O you who despise life, tell me whether that contempt of life renders you worthy of it. The opera opened immediately after Easter, and I was present at every performance. I was then entirely cured, and had resumed my usual life. I was pleased to see that Baletti showed off Marina to the best advantage. I never visited her, but Baletti was in the habit of breakfasting with me almost every morning. He had often mentioned an old actress who had left the stage for more than 20 years, and pretended to have been my father's friend. One day I took a fancy to call upon her, and he accompanied me to her house. I saw an old, broken-down crone whose toilette astonished me as much as her person. In spite of her wrinkles, her face was plastered with red and white, and her eyebrows were indebted to India ink for their black appearance. She exposed one half of her flabby, disgusting bosom, and there could be no doubt as to her false set of teeth. She wore a wig which fitted very badly, and allowed the intrusion of a few grey hairs which had survived the havoc of time. Her shaking hands made mine quiver when she pressed them. She diffused a perfume of amber at a distance of 20 yards, and her affected, mincing manner amused and sickened me at the same time. Her dress might possibly have been the fashion 20 years before. I was looking with dread at the fearful havoc of old age upon a face which, before merciless time had blighted it, had evidently been handsome, but what amazed me was the childish effrontery with which this time-withered specimen of womankind was still waging war with the help of her blasted charms. Baletti, who feared lest my too visible astonishment should vex her, told her that I was amazed at the fact that the beautiful strawberry which bloomed upon her chest had not been withered by the hand of time. It was a birthmark which was really very much like a strawberry. "It is that mark," said the old woman, simpering, "which gave me the name of La Fragoletta." Those words made me shudder. I had before my eyes the fatal phantom which was the cause of my existence. I saw the woman who had 30 years before seduced my father. If it had not been for her, he would never have thought of leaving his father's house, and would never have engendered me in the womb of a Venetian woman. I have never been of the opinion of the old author who says, Nemo vitam velet si daretur scientibus. Seeing how thoughtful I was, she politely inquired my name from Baletti, for he had presented me only as a friend, and without having given her notice of my visit. When he told her that my name was Casanova, she was extremely surprised. "Yes, madam," I said, "I am the son of Gaetan Casanova of Parma." "Heavens and earth! What is this? Ah, my friend, I adored your father. He was jealous without cause, and abandoned me. Had he not done so, you would have been my son. Allow me to embrace you with the feelings of a loving mother." I expected as much, and for fear she should fall, I went to her, and received her kiss, and abandoned myself to her tender recollections. Still an actress, she pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, pretending to weep, and assuring me that I was not to doubt the truth of what she said. "Although," she added, "I do not look an old woman yet. The only fault of your dear father," she continued, "was a want of gratitude." I have no doubt that she passed the same sentence upon the son, for, in spite of her kind invitation, I never paid her another visit. My purse was well filled, and as I did not care for Mantua, I resolved on going to Naples, to see again my dear Thérèse, Donna Lucrezia, Palo father and son, Don Antonia Casanova, and all my former acquaintances. However, my good genius did not approve of that decision, for I was not allowed to carry it into execution. I should have left Mantua 3 days later, had I not gone to the opera that night. I lived like an anchorite during my 2 months' stay in Mantua, owing to the folly I committed on the night of my arrival. I played only that time, and then I had been lucky. My slight erotic inconvenience, by compelling me to follow the diet necessary to my cure, most likely saved me from greater misfortune.
Chapter 21 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gilles Lehoux. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova, Episode 5, Milan and Mantua, Chapter 21. My journey to Cesena in search of treasure. I take up my quarters in Franzia's house, his daughter Javotte. The opera was nearly over when I was accosted by a young man who, abruptly, and without any introduction, told me that as a stranger I had been very wrong in spending 2 months in Mantua without paying a visit to the natural history collection belonging to his father, Don Antonio Capitani, commissary and prebendal president. "Sir," I answered, "I have been guilty only through ignorance, and if you would be so good as to call for me at my hotel tomorrow morning, before the evening I shall have atoned for my error, and you will no longer have the right to address me the same reproach." The son of the prebendal commissary called for me, and I found in his father a most eccentric, whimsical sort of man. The curiosities of his collection consisted of his family tree, of books of magic, relics, coins which he believed to be antediluvian, a model of the ark taken from nature at the time when Noah arrived in that extraordinary harbor, Mount Ararat, in Armenia. He loaded several medals, one of Sesostris, another of Semiramis, and an old knife of queer shape, covered with rust. Besides all those wonderful treasures, he possessed, but under lock and key, all the paraphernalia of Freemasonry. "Pray tell me," I said to him, "what relation there is between this collection and natural history? I see nothing here representing the 3 kingdoms. What? You do not see the antediluvian kingdom, that of Sesostris and that of Semiramis? Are not those the 3 kingdoms?" When I heard that answer, I embraced him with an exclamation of delight, which was sarcastic in its intent, but which he took for admiration, and he at once unfolded all the treasures of his whimsical knowledge respecting his possessions, ending with the rusty blade which he said was the very knife with which St. Peter cut off the ear of Malach. "What?" I exclaimed. "You are the possessor of this knife, and you are not as rich as Croesus?" "How could I be so through the possession of the knife?" "In 2 ways. In the first place, you could obtain possession of all the treasures hidden underground in the states of the Church. Yes, that is a natural consequence, because St. Peter has the keys. In the second place, you might sell the knife to the Pope, if you happen to possess proof of its authenticity." "You mean the parchment?" "Of course I have it. Do you think I would have bought one without the other?" "All right, then. In order to get possession of that knife, the Pope would, I have no doubt, make a cardinal of your son, but you must have the sheath too." "I have not got it." "But it is unnecessary. At all events, I can have one made." "That would not do. You must have the very one in which St. Peter himself sheathed the knife when God said, 'Mitte gladium tuum in vaginam.' That very sheath does exist, and it is now in the hands of a person who might sell it to you at a reasonable price, or you might sell him your knife, for the sheath without the knife is of no use to him, just as the knife is useless to you without the sheath." "How much would it cost me?" 1,000 sequins. And how much would that person give me for the knife? 1,000 sequins, for one has as much value as the other. The commissary, greatly astonished, looked at his son and said, with the voice of a judge on the bench, "Well, son, would you ever have thought that I would be offered 1,000 sequins for this knife?" He then opened a drawer and took out of it an old piece of paper, which he placed before me. It was written in Hebrew, and a facsimile of the knife was drawn on it. I pretended to be lost in admiration, and advised him very strongly to purchase the sheath. "It is not necessary for me to buy it, or for your friend to purchase the knife. We can find out and dig up the treasures together." "Not at all. The rubric says in the most forcible manner that the owner of the blade, in vaginam, shall be won. If the Pope were in possession of it, he would be able, through a magical operation known to me, to cut off one of the ears of every Christian king who might be thinking of encroaching upon the rights of the Church." "Wonderful indeed! But it is very true, for it is said in the Gospel that St. Peter did cut off the ear of somebody. Yes, of a king. Oh no, not of a king. Of a king, I tell you. Enquire whether Malek or Melek does not mean king. Well, in case I should make up my mind to sell the knife, who would give me the 1,000 sequins? I would. 1/2 tomorrow, cash down, the balance of 500 in a letter of exchange, payable 1 month after date. Ah, that is like business. Be good enough to accept a dish of macaroni with us tomorrow, and under a solemn pledge of secrecy we will discuss this important affair." I accepted and took my leave, firmly resolved on keeping up the joke. I came back on the following day, and the very first thing he told me was that, to his certain knowledge, there was an immense treasure hidden somewhere in the Papal States, and that he would make up his mind to purchase the sheath. This satisfied me that there was no fear of his taking me at my word, so I produced a purse full of gold, saying I was quite ready to complete our bargain for the purchase of the knife. "The treasure," he said, "is worth millions. But let us have dinner. You are not going to be served in silver plates and dishes, but in real Raphael mosaic." "My dear commissary, your magnificence astonishes me. Mosaic is, indeed, by far superior to silver plate, although an ignorant fool would only consider it ugly earthenware." The compliment delighted him. After dinner he spoke as follows: "A man in very good circumstances, residing in the Papal States, and owner of the country house in which he lives with all his family, is certain that there is a treasure in his cellar. He has written to my son, declaring himself ready to undertake all expenses necessary to possess himself of that treasure, if we could procure a magician powerful enough to unearth it." The son then took a letter out of his pocket, read me some passages, and begged me to excuse him if, in consequence of his having pledged himself to keep the secret, he could not communicate all the contents of the letter. But I had, unperceived by him, read the word Cesena, the name of the village, and that was enough for me. Therefore, all that is necessary is to give me the possibility of purchasing the sheath on credit, for I have no ready cash at present. You need not be afraid of endorsing my letters of exchange, and if you should know the magician, you might go halves with him." "The magician is ready. It is I. But unless you give me 500 sequins cash down, we cannot agree." "I have no money." "Then sell me the knife." "No, you are wrong. for now that I have seen it, I can easily take it from you. But I am honest enough not to wish to play such a trick upon you. You could take my knife from me? I should like to be convinced of that, but I do not believe it. You do not? Very well. Tomorrow the knife will be in my possession, but when it is once in my hands, you need not hope to see it again. A spirit which is under my orders will bring it to me at midnight, and the same spirit will tell me where the treasure is buried. Let the spirit tell you that, and I shall be convinced. Give me a pen, ink, and paper. I asked a question from my oracle, and the answer I had was that the treasure was to be found not far from the Rubicon. That is, I said, a torrent which was once a river. They consulted a dictionary, and found that the Rubicon flowed through Cesena. They were amazed, and, as I wished them to have full scope for wrong reasoning, I left them. I had taken a fancy, not to purloin 500 sequins from those poor fools, but to go and unearth the amount at their expense in the house of another fool, and to laugh at them all into the bargain. I longed to play the part of a magician. With that idea, when I left the house of the ridiculous antiquarian, I proceeded to the public library, where, with the assistance of a dictionary, I wrote the following specimen of facetious erudition. The treasure is buried in the earth at a depth of 17½ fathoms, and has been there for 6 centuries. Its value amounts to 2 millions of sequins, enclosed in a casket, the same which was taken by Godfrey de Bouillon from Matilda, Countess of Tuscany, in the year 1081, when he endeavoured to assist Henry IV against that princess. He buried the box himself in the very spot where it now is, before he went to lay siege to Jerusalem. Gregory VII, who was a great magician, having been informed of the place where it had been hidden, had resolved on getting possession of it himself, but death prevented him from carrying out his intentions. After the death of the Countess Matilda, in the year 1116, the genius presiding over all hidden treasures appointed 7 spirits to guard the box. During a night with a full moon, a learned magician can raise the treasure to the surface of the earth by placing himself in the middle of the magical ring called Maximus. I expected to see the father and son, and they came early in the morning. After some rambling conversation, I gave them what I had composed at the library, namely, the history of the treasure taken from the Countess Matilda. I told them that I had made up my mind to recover the treasure, and I promised them the 4th part of it, provided they would purchase the sheath. I concluded by threatening again to possess myself of their knife. I cannot decide, said the commissary, before I have seen the sheath. I pledged my word to show it to you tomorrow, I answered. We parted company, highly pleased with each other. In order to manufacture a sheath, such as the wonderful knife required, it was necessary to combine the most whimsical idea with the oddest shape. I recollected very well the form of the blade, and, as I was revolving in my mind the best way to produce something very extravagant but well adapted to the purpose I had in view, I spied in the yard of the hotel an old piece of leather, the remnant of what had been a fine gentleman's boot. It was exactly what I wanted. I took that old sole, boiled it, and made in it a slit in which I was certain that the knife would go easily. Then I pared it carefully on all sides to prevent the possibility of its former use being found out. I rubbed it with pumice stone, sand, and ochre, and finally I succeeded in imparting to my production such a queer, old-fashioned shape that I could not help laughing in looking at my work. When I presented it to the commissary, and he had found it an exact fit for the knife, the good man remained astounded. We dined together, and after dinner it was decided that his son should accompany me, and introduce me to the master of the house in which the treasure was buried, that I was to receive a letter of exchange for 1,000 Roman crowns, drawn by the son on Bologna, which would be made payable to my name only after I should have found the treasure, and that the knife with the sheath would be delivered into my hands only when I should require it for the great operation. Until then the son was to retain possession of it. Those conditions having been agreed upon, we made an agreement in writing, binding all parties, and our departure was fixed for the day after the morrow. As we left Mantua, the father pronounced a fervent blessing over his son's head, and told me that he was Count Palatine, showing me the diploma which he had received from the Pope. I embraced him, giving him his title of Count, and pocketed his letter of exchange. After bidding adieu to Marina, who was then the acknowledged mistress of Count Arcorati, and to Baletti, whom I was sure of meeting again in Venice before the end of the year, I went to sup with my friend O'Neilan. We started early in the morning, travelled through Ferrara and Bologna, and reached Cesena, where we put up at the posting-house. We got up early the next day and walked quietly to the house of George Franzia, a wealthy peasant, who was owner of the treasure. It was only 1/4 of a mile from the city, and the good man was agreeably surprised by our arrival. He embraced Capitani, whom he knew already, and leaving me with his family, he went out with my companion to talk business. Observant as usual, I passed the family in review, and fixed my choice upon the eldest daughter. The youngest girl was ugly, and the son looked a regular fool. The mother seemed to be the real master of the household, and there were 3 or 4 servants going about the premises. The eldest daughter was called Geneviève, or Javotte, a very common name among the girls of Cesena. I told her that I thought her 18, but she answered, in a tone half serious, half vexed, that I was very much mistaken, for she had only just completed her 14th year. "I am very glad it is so, my pretty child." These words brought back her smile. The house was well situated, and there was not another dwelling round it for at least 400 yards. I was glad to see that I should have comfortable quarters, but I was annoyed by a very unpleasant stink which tainted the air, and which could certainly not be agreeable to the spirits I had to evoke. "Madame Franzia," said I, to the mistress of the house, "what is the cause of that bad smell?" "Sir, it arises from the hemp which we are macerating." I concluded that if the cause were removed, I should get rid of the effect. "What is that hemp worth, madame?" I inquired. "About 40 crowns. "Here they are. The hemp belongs to me now, and I must beg your husband to have it removed immediately." Capitani called me, and I joined him. Franzia showed me all the respect due to a great magician, although I had not much the appearance of one. We agreed that he should receive 1/4 of the treasure, Capitani another 1/4, and that the remainder should belong to me, We certainly did not show much respect for the rites of St. Peter. I told Franzia that I should require a room with 2 beds for myself alone, and an anteroom for bathing apparatus. Capitani's room was to be in a different part of the house, and my room was to be provided with 3 tables, 2 of them small and 1 large. I added that he must at once procure me a sewing girl between the ages of 14 and 18. She was to be a virgin, and it was necessary that she should, as well as every person in the house, keep the secret faithfully, in order that no suspicion of our proceedings should reach the Inquisition, or all would be lost. I intend to take up my quarters here tomorrow, I added. I require 2 meals every day, and the only wine I can drink is Gervaise. For my breakfast I drink a peculiar kind of chocolate which I make myself, and which I have brought with me. I promise to pay my own expenses in case we do not succeed. Please remove the hemp to a place sufficiently distant from the house, so that its bad smell may not annoy the spirits to be evoked by me, and let the air be purified by the discharge of gunpowder. Besides, you must send a trusty servant tomorrow to convey our luggage from the hotel here, and keep constantly in the house and at my disposal 100 new wax candles and 3 torches. After I had given these instructions to Franzia, I left him, and went towards Cesena with Capitani. But we had not gone 100 yards when we heard the good man running after us. "Sir," he said to me, "be kind enough to take back the 40 crowns which you paid to my wife for the hemp." "No, I will not do anything of the sort, for I do not want you to sustain any loss." "Take them back, I beg. I can sell the hemp in the course of the day for 40 crowns without difficulty." "In that case I will, for I have confidence in what you say." Such proceedings on my part impressed the excellent man very favorably, and he entertained the deepest veneration for me, which was increased, when, against Capitani's advice, I resolutely refused 100 sequins, which he wanted to force upon me for my travelling expenses. I threw him into rapture by telling him that on the eve of possessing an immense treasure, it was unnecessary to think of such trifles. The next morning our luggage was sent for, and we found ourselves comfortably located in the house of the wealthy and simple Franzia. He gave us a good dinner, but with too many dishes, and I told him to be more economical, and to give only some good fish for our supper, which he did. After supper he told me that, as far as the young maiden was concerned, he thought he could recommend his daughter Javotte, as he had consulted his wife, and had found I could rely upon the girl being a virgin. "Very good," I said. "Now tell me what grounds you have for supposing that there is a treasure in your house." "In the first place, the oral tradition transmitted from father to son for the last 8 generations. In the second, the heavy sounds which are heard underground during the night. Besides, the door of the cellar opens and shuts of itself every 3 or 4 minutes, which must certainly be the work of the devils, seen every night wandering through the country in the shape of pyramidal flames. If it is as you say, it is evident that you have a treasure hidden somewhere in your house. It is as certain as the fact that 2 and 2 are 4. Be very careful not to put a lock to the door of the cellar to prevent its opening and shutting of itself. Otherwise you would have an earthquake, which would destroy everything here. Spirits will enjoy perfect freedom, and they break through every obstacle raised against them. God be praised for having sent here, 40 years ago, a learned man who told my father exactly the same thing. That great magician required only 3 days more to unearth the treasure, when my father heard that the Inquisition had given orders to arrest him, and he lost no time in ensuring his escape. Can you tell me how it is that magicians are not more powerful than the inquisitors? Because the monks have a greater number of devils under their command than we have. But I feel certain that your father had already expended a great deal of money with that learned man. About 2,000 crowns. Oh, more. I told Franzia to follow me, and, in order to accomplish something in the magic line, I dipped a towel in some water, and uttering fearful words which belonged to no human language, I washed the eyes, the temples, and the chest of every person in the family, including Javotte, who might have objected to it if I had not begun with her father, mother, and brother. I made them swear upon my pocket-book that they were not laboring under any impure disease, and I concluded the ceremony by compelling Javotte to swear likewise that she had her maidenhood. As I saw that she was blushing to the very roots of her hair in taking the oath, I was cruel enough to explain to her what it meant. I then asked her to swear again, but she answered that there was no need of it, now that she knew what it was. I ordered all the family to kiss me, and finding that Javotte had eaten garlic, I forbade the use of it entirely, which order Franzia promised should be complied with. Geneviève was not a beauty as far as her features were concerned. Her complexion was too much sunburnt, and her mouth was too large, but her teeth were splendid, and her underlip projected slightly, as if it had been formed to receive kisses. Her bosom was well made, and as firm as a rock, but her hair was too light, and her hands too fleshy. The defects, however, had to be overlooked, and altogether she was not an unpleasant morsel. I did not purpose to make her fall in love with me. With the peasant girl, that task might have been a long one. All I wanted was to train her to perfect obedience, which, in default of love, has always appeared to me the essential point. True that in such a case one does not enjoy the ecstatic raptures of love, but one finds a compensation in the complete control obtained over the woman. I gave notice to the father, to Capitani, and to Javotte, that each would, in turn and in the order of their age, take supper with me, and that Javotte would sleep every night in my anteroom, where was to be placed a bath in which I would bathe my guest 1/2 hour before sitting down to supper, and the guest was not to have broken his fast throughout the day. I prepared a list of all the articles of which I pretended to be in need, and giving it to Franzia, I told him to go to Cesena himself the next day, and to purchase everything without bargaining to obtain a lower price. Among other things, I ordered a piece, from 20 to 30 yards long, of white linen, thread, scissors, needles, storax, myrrh, sulphur, olive oil, camphor, 1 ream of paper, pens and ink, 12 sheets of parchment, brushes, and a branch of olive tree to make a stick of 18 inches in length. After I had given all my orders very seriously and without any wish to laugh, I went to bed highly pleased with my personification of a magician, in which I was astonished to find myself so completely successful. The next morning, as soon as I was dressed, I sent for Capitani, and commanded him to proceed every day to Cesena, to go to the best coffee-house, to learn carefully every piece of news and every rumour, and to report them to me. Franzia, who had faithfully obeyed my orders, returned before noon from the city with all the articles I had asked for. "I have not bargained for anything," he said to me, "and the merchants must, I have no doubt, have taken me for a fool, for I have certainly paid 1/3 more than the things are worth. So much the worse for them, if they have deceived you, but you would have spoilt everything if you had beaten them down in their price. Now, send me your daughter, and let me be alone with her." As soon as Javotte was in my room, I made her cut the linen in 7 pieces, 4 of 5 feet long, 2 of 2 feet, and 1 of 2 feet and a half. The last one was intended to form the hood of the robe I was to wear for the great operation. Then I said to Javotte, "Sit down near my bed and begin sewing. You will dine here and remain at work until the evening. When your father comes, you must let us be alone, but as soon as he leaves me, come back and go to bed." She dined in my room, where her mother waited on her without speaking, and gave her nothing to drink except Saint Gervais wine. Towards evening her father came, and she left us. I had the patience to wash the good man while he was in the bath, after which he had supper with me. He ate voraciously, telling me that it was the first time in his life that he had remained 24 hours without breaking his fast. Intoxicated with Saint Gervais wine he had drunk, he went to bed and slept soundly until morning, when his wife brought me my chocolate. Javotte was kept sewing as on the day before. She left the room in the evening when Capitani came in, and I treated him in the same manner as Franzia. On the 3rd day it was Javotte's turn, and that had been the object I had kept in view all the time. When the hour came, I said to her, "Go, Javotte, get into the bath and call me when you are ready, for I must purify you as I have purified your father and Capitani." She obeyed, and within a quarter of an hour she called me. I performed a great many ablutions on every part of her body, making her assume all sorts of positions, for she was perfectly docile. But, as I was afraid of betraying myself, I felt more suffering than enjoyment, and my indiscreet hands, running over every part of her person, and remaining longer and more willingly on a certain spot, the sensitiveness of which is extreme. The poor girl was excited by an ardent fire, which was at last quenched by the natural result of that excitement. I made her get out of the bath soon after that, and as I was drying her I was very near forgetting magic to follow the impulse of nature. But, quicker than I, nature relieved itself, and I was thus enabled to reach the end of the scene without anticipating the denouement. I told Javotte to dress herself, and to come back to me as soon as she was ready. She had been fasting all day, and her toilet did not take a long time. She ate with ferocious appetite, and the Saint Gervais wine, which she drank like water, imparted so much animation to her complexion that it was no longer possible to see how sunburnt she was. Being alone with her after supper, I said to her, "My dear Javotte, have you been displeased at all I have compelled you to submit to this evening?" "Not at all. I liked it very much." "Then I hope that you will have no objection to get in the bath with me tomorrow, and to wash me as I have washed you." "Most willingly. But shall I know how to do it well?" "I will teach you, and for the future I wish you to sleep every night in my room, because I must have a complete certainty that on the night of the great operation I shall find you such as you ought to be." From that time Javotte was at her ease with me. All her restraint disappeared. She would look at me and smile with entire confidence. Nature had operated, and the mind of a young girl soon enlarges its sphere when pleasure is her teacher. She went to bed, and as she knew that she had no longer anything to conceal from me, her modesty was not alarmed when she undressed herself in my presence. It was very warm. Any kind of covering is unpleasant in the hot weather, so she stripped to the skin and soon fell asleep. I did the same, but I could not help feeling some regret at having engaged myself not to take advantage of the position before the night of the great incantation. I knew that the operation to unearth the treasure would be a complete failure, but I knew likewise that it would not fail because Javat's virginity was gone. At daybreak the girl rose and began sewing. As soon as she had finished the robe, I told her to make a crown of parchment with 7 long points, on which I painted some fearful figures and hieroglyphs. In the evening, 1 hour before supper, I got into the bath, and Javat joined me as soon as I called her. She performed upon me with great zeal the same ceremonies that I had done for her the day before, and she was as gentle and docile as possible. I spent a delicious hour in that bath, enjoying everything, but respecting the essential point. My kisses making her happy, and seeing that I had no objection to her caresses, she loaded me with them. I was so pleased at all the amorous enjoyment her senses were evidently experiencing, that I made her easy by telling her that the success of the great magic operation depended on the amount of pleasure she enjoyed. She then made extraordinary efforts to persuade me that she was happy, and without overstepping the limits where I had made up my mind to stop, we got out of the bath highly pleased with each other. As we were on the point of going to bed, she said to me, "Would it injure the success of your operation if we were to sleep together?" "No, my dear girl. Provided you are a virgin on the day of the great incantation, it is all I require." She threw herself in my arms, and we spent a delightful night, during which I had full opportunity of admiring the strength of her constitution, as well as my own restraint, for I had sufficient control over myself not to break through the last obstacle. I passed a great part of the following night with Franzia and Capitani, in order to see with my own eyes the wonderful things which the worthy peasant had mentioned to me. Standing in the yard, I heard distinctly heavy blows struck under the ground at intervals of 3 or 4 minutes. It was like the noise which would be made by a heavy pestle falling in a large copper mortar. I took my pistols, and placed myself near the self-moving door of the cellar, holding a dark lantern in my hand. I saw the door open slowly, and in about 30 seconds closing with violence. I opened and closed it myself several times, and, unable to discover any hidden physical cause for the phenomenon, I felt satisfied that there was some unknown roguery at work, but I did not care much to find it out. We went upstairs again, and, placing myself on the balcony, I saw in the yard several shadows moving about. They were evidently caused by the heavy and damp atmosphere, and as to the pyramidal flames, which I could see hovering over the fields, it was a phenomenon well known to me. But I allowed my 2 companions to remain persuaded that they were the spirits keeping watch over the treasure. That phenomenon is very common throughout southern Italy, where the country is often at night illuminated by those meteors which the people believe to be devils, and ignorance has called night spirits, or will-o'-the-wisps. Dear reader, the next chapter will tell you how my magic undertaking ended, and perhaps you will enjoy a good laugh at my expense. But you need not be afraid of hurting my feelings. End of chapter 20.
Chapter 22 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 5, Milan and Mantua. Chapter 22. My great operation had to be performed on the following day. Otherwise, according to all established rules, I would have had to wait until the next full moon. I had to make the gnomes raise the treasure to the surface of the earth at the very spot on which my incantations would be performed. Of course, I knew well enough that I should not succeed, but I knew likewise that I could easily reconcile Francia and Capitani to a failure by inventing some excellent reasons for our want of success. In the meantime, I had to play my part of a magician, in which I took a real delight. I kept Javotte at work all day, sewing together, in the shape of a ring, some 30 sheets of paper on which I painted the most wonderful designs. That ring, which I called Maximus, had a diameter of 3 geometric paces. I had manufactured a sort of sceptre or magic wand with a branch of olive brought by Francia from Cesena. Thus prepared, I told Javotte that at 12 o'clock at night, when I came out of the magic ring, she was to be ready for everything. The order did not seem repugnant to her. She longed to give me that proof of her obedience, and, on my side, considering myself as her debtor, I was in a hurry to pay my debt and to give her every satisfaction. The hour having struck, I ordered Francia and Capitani to stand on the balcony, so as to be ready to come to me if I called for them, and also to prevent anyone in the house seeing my proceedings. I then threw off all profane garments. I clothed myself in a long white robe, the work of a virgin's innocent hands. I allow my long hair to fall loosely. I place the extraordinary crown on my head, the circle Maximus on my shoulders, and, seizing the sceptre with one hand, the wonderful knife with the other, I go down into the yard. There I spread my circle on the ground, uttering the most barbarous words, and after going round it 3 times, I jump into the middle. Squatting down there, I remain a few minutes motionless. Then I rise, and I fix my eyes upon a heavy, dark cloud coming from the west, whilst from the same quarter the thunder is rumbling loudly. What a sublime genius I should have appeared in the eyes of my 2 fools, if, having a short time before taken notice of the sky in that part of the horizon, I had announced to them that my operation would be attended by that phenomenon. The cloud spreads with fearful rapidity, and soon the sky seems covered with a funeral pall, on which the most vivid flashes of lightning keep blazing every moment. Such a storm was a very natural occurrence, and I had no reason to be astonished at it, but somehow fear was beginning to creep into me, and I wished myself in my room. My fright soon increased at the sight of the lightning, and on hearing the claps of thunder which succeeded each other with fearful rapidity, and seemed to roar over my very head. I then realized what extraordinary effect fear can have on the mind, for I fancied that, if I was not annihilated by the fires of heaven which were flashing all around me, it was only because they could not enter my magic ring. Thus was I admiring my own deceitful work. That foolish reason prevented me from leaving the circle in spite of the fear which caused me to shudder. If it had not been for that belief, the result of a cowardly fright, I would not have remained 1 minute where I was, and my hurried flight would no doubt have opened the eyes of my 2 dupes, who could not have failed to see that, far from being a magician, I was only a poltroon. The violence of the wind, the claps of thunder, the piercing cold, and above all, fear, made me tremble all over like an aspen leaf. My system, which I thought proof against every accident, had vanished. I acknowledged an avenging God, who had waited for this opportunity of punishing me at one blow for all my sins, and of annihilating me, in order to put an end to my want of faith. The complete immobility which paralyzed all my limbs seemed to me a proof of the uselessness of my repentance, and that conviction only increased my consternation. But the roaring of the thunder dies away, the rain begins to fall heavily, danger vanishes, and I feel my courage reviving. Such is man! or at all events such was I at that moment. It was raining so fast that, if it had continued pouring with the same violence for a quarter of an hour, the country would have been inundated. As soon as the rain had ceased, the wind abated, the clouds were dispersed, and the moon shone in all its splendor, like silver in the pure blue sky. I take up my magic ring, and telling the two friends to retire to their beds without speaking to me, I hurried to my room. I still felt rather shaken, and, casting my eyes on Javotte, I thought her so pretty that I felt positively frightened. I allowed her to dry me, and after that necessary operation I told her piteously to go to bed. The next morning she told me that, when she saw me come in, shaking all over in spite of the heat, she had herself shuddered with fear. After 8 hours of sound sleep I felt all right, but I had had enough of the comedy, and to my great surprise the sight of Geneviève did not move me in any way. The obedient Javotte had certainly not changed, but I was not the same. I was for the first time in my life reduced to a state of apathy, and in consequence of the superstitious ideas which had crowded in my mind the previous night, I imagined that the innocence of that young girl was under the special protection of heaven, and that if I had dared to rob her of her virginity, the most rapid and terrible death would have been my punishment. At all events, thanks to my youth and my exalted ideas, I fancied that through my self-denying resolutions the father would not be so great a dupe, and the daughter not so unhappy, unless the result should prove as unfortunate for her as it had been for poor Lucy of Pasean. The moment that Javotte became in my eyes an object of holy horror, my departure was decided. The resolution was all the more irrevocable, because I fancied some old peasant might have witnessed all my tricks in the middle of the magic ring, in which case the most holy, or if you like, the most infernal Inquisition, receiving information from him, might very well have caught me, and enhanced my fame by some splendid auto da fe, in which I had not the slightest wish to be the principal actor. It struck me as so entirely within the limits of probability, that I sent at once for Franzia and Capitani, and in the presence of the unpolluted Virgin I told them that I had obtained from the 7 spirits watching over the treasure all the necessary particulars, but that I had been compelled to enter into an agreement with them to delay the extraction of the treasure placed under their guardianship. I told Franzia that I would hand to him in writing all the information which I had compelled the spirits to give me. I produced, in reality, a few minutes afterwards, a document similar to the one I had concocted at the public library in Mantua, adding that the treasure consisted of diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and 100,000 pounds of gold dust. I made him take an oath on my pocket-book to wait for me, and not to have faith in any magician unless he gave him an account of the treasure in every way similar to the one which, as a great favour, I was leaving in his hands. I ordered him to burn the crown and the ring, but to keep the other things carefully until my return. "As for you, Capitani," I said to my companion, "proceed at once to Cesena, and remain at the inn until our luggage has been brought by the man whom Franzia is going to send with it." Seeing that poor Javotte looked miserable, I went up to her, and, speaking to her very tenderly, I promised to see her again before long. I told her at the same time that, the great operation having been performed successfully, her virginity was no longer necessary, and that she was at liberty to marry as soon as she pleased, or whenever a good opportunity offered itself. I at once returned to the city, where I found Capitani making his preparations to go to the fair of Lugo, and then to Mantua. He told me, crying like a child, that his father would be in despair when he saw him come back without the knife of St. Peter. "You may have it," I said, "with the sheath, if you will let me have the 1,000 Roman crowns, the amount of the letter of exchange." He thought it an excellent bargain, and accepted it joyfully. I gave him back the letter of exchange, and made him sign a paper by which he undertook to return the sheath whenever I brought the same amount, but he is still waiting for it. I did not know what to do with the wonderful sheath, and I was not in want of money, but I should have considered myself dishonoured if I had given it to him for nothing. Besides, I thought it a good joke to levy a contribution upon the ignorant credulity of a Count Palatine created by the grace of the Pope. In after days, however, I would willingly have refunded his money, but, as fate would have it, we did not see each other for a long time, and when I met him again I was not in a position to return the amount. It is therefore only to chance that I was indebted for the sum, and certainly Capitani never dreamt of complaining, for, being the possessor of gladium cum vagina, he truly believed himself the master of every treasure concealed in the Papal States. Capitani took leave of me on the following day, and I intended to proceed at once to Naples, but I was again prevented. This is how it happened. As I returned to the inn after a short walk, mine host handed me the bill of the play announcing 4 performances of the Didone of Metastasio at the Spada. Seeing no acquaintance of mine among the actors or actresses, I made up my mind to go to the play in the evening, and to start early the next day with post-horses. A remnant of my fear of the Inquisition urged me on, and I could not help fancying that spies were at my heels. Before entering the house I went into the actress's dressing-room, and the leading lady struck me as rather good-looking. Her name was Narizzi, and she was from Bologna. I bowed to her, and after the commonplace conversation usual in such cases, I asked her whether she was free. "I am only engaged with the manager," she answered. "Have you any lover?" "No." "I offer myself for the post, if you have no objection." She smiled jeeringly, and said, "Will you take 4 tickets for the 4 performances?" I took 2 sequins out of my purse, taking care to let her see that it was well filled, and when she gave me the 4 tickets, presented them to the maid who was dressing her, and was prettier than the mistress, and so left the room without uttering a single word. She called me back. I pretended not to hear her, and took a ticket for the pit. After the first ballet, finding the whole performance very poor, I was thinking of going away, when, happening to look towards the chief box, I saw to my astonishment that it was tenanted by the Venetian Manzoni and the celebrated Juliet. The reader will doubtless remember the ball she gave at my house in Venice, and the smack with which she saluted my cheek on that occasion. They had not yet noticed me, and I inquired from the person seated next to me who was that beautiful lady wearing so many diamonds. He told me that she was Madame Querini, from Venice, whom Count Spada, the owner of the theatre, who was sitting near her, had brought with him from Faenza. I was glad to hear that Monsieur Querini had married her at last, but I did not think of renewing the acquaintance, for reasons which my reader cannot have forgotten, if he recollects our quarrel when I had to dress her as an abbé. I was on the point of going away, when she happened to see me, and called me. I went up to her, and, not wishing to be known by anyone, I whispered to her that my name was Ferruzi. Manzoni informed me that I was speaking to Her Excellency Madame Querini. "I know it," I said, "through a letter which I have received from Venice, and I beg to offer my most sincere congratulations to Madame." She heard me, and introduced me to Count Spada, creating me a baron on the spot. He invited me most kindly to come to his box, asked me where I came from, where I was going to, etc., and begged the pleasure of my company at supper for the same evening. 10 years before, he had been Juliet's friend in Vienna, when Maria Theresa, having been informed of the pernicious influence of her beauty, gave her notice to quit the city. She had renewed her acquaintance with him in Venice, and had contrived to make him take her to Bologna on a pleasure trip. Monsieur Manzoni, her old follower, who gave me all this information, accompanied her in order to bear witness of her good conduct before Monsieur Querini. I must say that Manzoni was not a well-chosen chaperon. In Venice she wanted everybody to believe that Querini had married her secretly, but at a distance of 50 leagues she did not think such a formality necessary, and she had already been presented by the general to all the nobility of Cesena as Madame Querini Papozzes. Monsieur Querini would have been wrong in being jealous of the Count, for he was an old acquaintance who would do no harm. Besides, it is admitted amongst certain women that the reigning lover who is jealous of an old acquaintance is nothing but a fool, and ought to be treated as such. Juliet, most likely afraid of my being indiscreet, had lost no time in making the first advances, but, seeing that I had likewise some reason to fear her want of discretion, she felt reassured. From the first moment I treated her politely, and with every consideration due to her position. I found numerous company at the general's, and some pretty women. Not seeing Juliet, I inquired for her from Monsieur Manzoni, who told me that she was at the faro table, losing her money. I saw her seated next to the banker, who turned pale at the sight of my face. He was no other than the so-called Count Celi. He offered me a card, which I refused politely, but I accepted Juliette's offer to be her partner. She had about 50 sequins. I handed her the same sum, and took a seat near her. After the first round, she asked me if I knew the banker. Celi had heard the question. I answered negatively. A lady on my left told me that the banker was Count Alfani. Half an hour later, Madame Querini went 7 and lost. She increased her stake of 10 sequins. It was the last deal of the game, and therefore the decisive one. I rose from my chair, and fixed my eyes on the banker's hands. But in spite of that, he cheated before me, and Madame lost. Just at that moment the general offered her his arm to go to supper. She left the remainder of her gold on the table, and after supper, having played again, she lost every sequin. I enlivened the supper by my stories and witty jests. I captivated everybody's friendship, and particularly the general's, who, having heard me say that I was going to Naples only to gratify an amorous fancy, entreated me to spend a month with him and to sacrifice my whim. But it was all in vain. My heart was unoccupied. I longed to see Lucrezia and Thérèse, whose charms after 5 years I could scarcely recollect. I only consented to remain in Cesena the 4 days during which the general intended to stay. The next morning, as I was dressing, I had a call from the cowardly Alfani Celi. I received him with a jeering smile, saying that I had expected him. The hairdresser being in the room, Celi did not answer, but as soon as we were alone, he said, "How could you possibly expect my visit?" "I will tell you my reason as soon as you have handed me 100 sequins, and you are going to do so at once." "Here are 50 which I brought for you. You cannot demand more from me." "Thank you, I take them on account, but as I am good-natured, I advise you not to show yourself this evening in Count Spada's drawing-rooms, for you would not be admitted, and it would be owing to me." "I hope that you will think twice before you are guilty of such an ungenerous act." "I have made up my mind. But now leave me." There was a knock at my door, and the self-styled Count Alfani went away without giving me the trouble of repeating my order. My new visitor proved to be the first castrato of the theatre, who brought an invitation to dinner from Narici. The invitation was curious, and I accepted it with a smile. The castrato was named Nicholas Peretti. He pretended to be the grandson of a natural child of Sixtus V. It might have been, so I shall have to mention him again in 15 years. When I made my appearance at Narici's house, I saw Count Alfani, who certainly did not expect me, and must have taken me for his evil genius. He bowed to me with great politeness, and begged that I would listen to a few words in private. "Here are 50 sequins more," he said, "but as an honest man you can take them only to give them to Madame Querini. But how can you hand the amount to her without letting her know that you have forced me to refund it? You understand what consequences such a confession might have for me." "I shall give her the money only when you have let this place. In the meantime I promise to be discreet, but be careful not to assist fortune in my presence, or I must act in a manner that will not be agreeable to you." "Double the capital of my bank, and we can be partners." "Your proposal is an insult." He gave me 50 sequins, and I promised to keep his secret. There was a numerous attendance in Narici's rooms, especially of young men, who after dinner lost all their money. I did not play, and it was a disappointment for my pretty hostess, who had invited me only because she had judged me as simple as the others. I remained an indifferent witness of the play, and it gave me an opportunity of realizing how wise Mohammed had been in forbidding all games of chance. In the evening after the opera, Count Celi had the faro bank, and I lost 200 sequins, but I could only accuse ill luck. Madame Querini won. The next day before supper I broke the bank, and after supper, feeling tired and well pleased with what I had won, I returned to the inn. The following morning, which was the 3rd day, and therefore the last but one of my stay in Cesena, I called at the general's. I heard that his adjutant had thrown the cards in Alfani's face, and that a meeting had been arranged between them for 12 o'clock. I went to the adjutant's room and offered to be his second, assuring him that there would be no blood spilled. He declined my offer with many thanks, and at dinner-time he told me that I had guessed rightly, for Count Alfani had left for Rome. In that case, I said to the guests, I will take the bank tonight. After dinner, being alone with Madame Querini, I told her all about Alfani, alias Celli, and handed her the 50 sequins of which I was the depositary. I suppose, she said, that by means of this fable you hope to make me accept 50 sequins, but I thank you, I am not in want of money. I will give you my word that I have compelled the thief to refund this money, together with the 50 sequins of which he had likewise cheated me. That may be, but I do not wish to believe you. I beg to inform you that I am not simple enough to allow myself to be duped, and, what is worse, cheated in such a manner. Philosophy forbids a man to feel repentance for a good deed, but he must certainly have a right to regret such a deed when it is malevolently misconstrued and turned against him as a reproach. In the evening, after the performance, which was to be the last, I took the bank according to my promise. I lost a few sequins, but was caressed by everybody, and that is much more pleasant than winning, when we are not labouring under the hard necessity of making money. Count Spada, who had got quite fond of me, wanted me to accompany him to Bicicleta, but I resisted his entreaties, because I had firmly resolved on going to Naples. The next morning I was awoke by a terrible noise in the passage, almost at the door of my room. Getting out of my bed, I opened my door to ascertain the cause of the uproar. I see a troop of sbirri at the door of a chamber, and in that chamber, sitting up in bed, a fine-looking man who was making himself hoarse by screaming in Latin against that rabble, the plague of Italy, and against the innkeeper, who had been rascally enough to open the door. I inquire of the innkeeper what it all means. "This gentleman," answers the scoundrel, "who, it appears, can only speak Latin, is in bed with a girl, and the sbirri of the bishop have been sent to know whether she is truly his wife, all perfectly regular. If she is his wife, he has only to convince them by showing a certificate of marriage. If she is not, of course he must go to prison with her. Yet it need not happen, for I undertake to arrange everything in a friendly manner for a few sequins. I have only to exchange a few words with the chief of the sbirri, and they will all go away. If you can speak Latin, you had better go in and make him listen to reason." "Who has broken open the door of this room?" "Nobody. I have opened it myself with the key, as is my duty." "Yes, the duty of a highway robber, but not of an honest innkeeper." Such infamous dealing aroused my indignation, and I made up my mind to interfere. I entered the room, although I had still my nightcap on, and informed the gentleman of the cause of the disturbance. He answers with a laugh that, in the first place, it was impossible to say whether the person who was in bed with him was a woman, for that person had only been seen in the costume of a military officer, and that, in the second place, he did not think that any human being had a right to compel him to say whether his bedfellow was his wife or his mistress, even supposing that his companion was truly a woman. "At all events," he added, "I am determined not to give 1 crown to arrange the affair, and to remain in bed until my door is shut. The moment I am dressed, I will treat you to amusing dénouement of the comedy. I will drive away all those scoundrels at the point of my sword." I then see in a corner a broadsword and a Hungarian costume looking like a military uniform. I ask whether he is an officer. "I have written my name and profession," he answers, "in the hotel book." Astonished at the absurdity of the innkeeper, I ask him whether it is so. He confesses it, but adds that the clergy have the right to prevent scandal. "The insult you have offered to that officer, Mr. Landlord, will cost you very dear." His only answer is to laugh in my face. Highly enraged at seeing such a scoundrel laugh at me, I take up the officer's quarrel warmly, and asked him to entrust his passport to me for a few minutes. "I have 2, he says, "therefore I can let you have 1. And taking the document out of his pocket-book, he hands it to me. The passport was signed by Cardinal Albani. The officer was a captain in a Hungarian regiment belonging to the Empress and Queen. He was from Rome, on his way to Parma with dispatches from Cardinal Albani Alexander to Monsieur de Tillon, Prime Minister of the Infanta of Parma. At the same moment a man burst into the room, speaking very loudly, and asked me to tell the officer that the affair must be settled at once, because he wanted to leave Cesena immediately. "Who are you?" I asked the man. He answered that he was the vetturino, whom the captain had engaged. I saw that it was a regular put-up thing, and begged the captain to let me attend to the business, assuring him that I would settle it to his honour and advantage. "Do exactly as you please," he said. Then, turning towards the vetturino, I ordered him to bring up the captain's luggage, saying that he would be paid at once. When he had done so, I handed him 8 sequins out of my own purse, and made him give me a receipt in the name of the captain, who could only speak German, Hungarian, and Latin. The vetturino went away, and the sbirri followed him in the greatest consternation, except 2 who remained. "Captain," I said to the Hungarian, "keep your bed until I return. I am going now to the bishop to give him an account of these proceedings, and make him understand that he owes you some reparation. Besides, General Spada is here, and—" "I know him," interrupted the captain, "and if I had been aware of his being in Cesena, I would have shot the landlord when he opened my door to those scoundrels." I hurried over my toilet, and without waiting for my hair to be dressed, I proceeded to the bishop's palace, and making a great deal of noise, I almost compelled the servants to take me to his room. A lackey, who was at the door, informed me that his lordship was still in bed. "Never mind, I cannot wait." I pushed him aside and entered the room. I related the whole affair to the bishop, exaggerating the uproar, and making much of the injustice of such proceedings, and railing at a vexatious police daring to molest travellers and to insult the sacred rights of individuals and nations. The bishop, without answering me, referred me to his chancellor, to whom I repeated all I had said to the bishop, but with words calculated to irritate rather than to soften, and certainly not likely to obtain the release of the captain. I even went so far as to threaten, and I said that if I were in the place of the officer, I would demand a public reparation. The priest laughed at my threats. It was just what I wanted, and after asking me whether I had taken leave of my senses, the chancellor told me to apply to the captain of the sbirri. "I shall go to somebody else," I said, "reverend sir, besides the captain of the sbirri." Delighted at having made matters worse, I left him and proceeded straight to the house of General Spada, but being told that he could not be seen before 8 o'clock, I returned to the inn. The state of excitement in which I was, the ardour with which I had made the affair mine, might have led anyone to suppose that my indignation had been roused only by disgust at seeing an odious persecution perpetrated upon a stranger by an unrestrained, immoral, and vexatious police. But why should I deceive the kind reader, to whom I have promised to tell the truth? I must therefore say that my indignation was real, but my ardour was excited by another feeling of a more personal nature. I fancied that the woman concealed under the bedclothes was a beauty. I longed to see her face, which shame, most likely, had prevented her from showing. She had heard me speak, and the good opinion that I had of myself did not leave the shadow of a doubt in my mind that she would prefer me to her captain. The door of the room being still open, I went in and related to the captain all I had done, assuring him that in the course of the day he would be at liberty to continue his journey at the bishop's expense, for the general would not fail to obtain complete satisfaction for him. He thanked me warmly, gave back the 8 ducats I had paid for him, and said that he would not leave the city till the next day. "From what country," I asked him, "is your travelling companion?" "From France, and he only speaks his native language." "Then you speak French?" "Not one word." "That is amusing. Then you converse in pantomime?" "Exactly." "I pity you, for it is a difficult language." "Yes, to express the various shades of thought, but in the material part of our intercourse we understand each other quite well." "May I invite myself to breakfast with you?" "Ask my friend whether he has any objection." "Amiable companion of the captain," I said in French, "will you kindly accept me as a third guest at the breakfast table?" At these words I saw coming out of the bedclothes a lovely head, with dishevelled hair, and a blooming, laughing face, which, although it was crowned with a man's cap, left no doubt that the captain's friend belonged to that sex without which man would be the most miserable animal on earth. Delighted with the graceful creature, I told her that I had been happy enough to feel interested in her even before I had seen her, and that now that I had the pleasure of seeing her, I could but renew with greater zeal all my efforts to serve her. She answered me with the grace and the animation which are the exclusive privilege of her native country, and retorted my argument in the most witty manner. I was already under the charm. My request was granted. I went out to order breakfast, and to give them an opportunity of making themselves comfortable in bed, for they were determined not to get up until the door of their room was closed again. The waiter came, and I went in with him. I found my lovely Frenchwoman wearing a blue frock-coat, with her hair badly arranged like a man's, but very charming even in that strange costume. I longed to see her up. She ate her breakfast without once interrupting the officer speaking to me, but to whom I was not listening, or listening with very little attention, for I was in a sort of ecstatic trance. Immediately after breakfast I called on the general, and related the affair to him, enlarging upon it in such a manner as to pique his martial pride. I told him that, unless he settled the matter himself, the Hungarian captain was determined to send an express to the cardinal immediately. But my eloquence was unnecessary, for the general liked to see priests attend to the business of heaven, but he could not bear them to meddle in temporal affairs. "I shall," he said, "immediately put a stop to this ridiculous comedy, and treat it in a very serious manner. Go at once to the inn," he said to his aide-de-camp. "Invite that officer and his companion to dine with me today, and repair afterwards to the bishop's palace. Give him notice that the officer who has been so grossly insulted by his sbirri shall not leave the city before he has received a complete apology, and whatever sum of money he may claim as damages. Tell him that the notice comes from me, and that all the expenses incurred by the officer shall be paid by him." What pleasure it was for me to listen to these words! In my vanity I fancied I had almost prompted them to the general. I accompanied the aide-de-camp, and introduced him to the captain, who received him with the joy of a soldier meeting a comrade. The adjutant gave him the general's invitation for him and his companion, and asked him to write down what satisfaction he wanted, as well as the amount of damages he claimed. At the sight of the general's adjutant, the sbirri had quickly vanished. I handed to the captain pen, paper, and ink, and he wrote his claim in pretty good Latin for a native of Hungary. The excellent fellow absolutely refused to ask for more than 30 sequins, in spite of all I said to make him claim 100. He was likewise a great deal too easy as to the satisfaction he demanded, for all he asked was to see the landlord and the sbirri beg his pardon on their knees in the presence of the general's adjutant. He threatened the bishop to send an express to Rome to Cardinal Alexander, unless his demands were complied with within 2 hours, and to remain in Cesena at the rate of 10 sequins a day at the bishop's expense. The officer left us, and a moment afterwards the landlord came in respectfully to inform the captain that he was free. But the captain having begged me to tell the scoundrel that he owed him a sound thrashing, he lost no time in gaining the door. I left my friends alone to get dressed, and to attend to my own toilette, as I dined with them at the general's. An hour afterwards I found them ready in their military costumes. The uniform of the Frenchwoman was of course a fancy one, but very elegant. The moment I saw her, I gave up all idea of Naples, and decided upon accompanying the two friends to Parma. The beauty of the lovely Frenchwoman had already captivated me. The captain was certainly on the threshold of 60, and, as a matter of course, I thought such a union very badly assorted. I imagined that the affair which I was already concocting in my brain could be arranged amicably. The adjutant came back with a priest sent by the bishop, who told the captain that he should have the satisfaction as well as the damages he had claimed, but that he must be content with 15 sequins. 30 or nothing, dryly answered the Hungarian. They were at last given to him, and thus the matter ended. The victory was due to my exertions, and I had won the friendship of the captain and his lovely companion. In order to guess, even at first sight, that the friend of the worthy captain was not a man, it was enough to look at the hips. She was too well made as a woman ever to pass for a man, and the women who disguise themselves in male attire and boast of being like men are very wrong, for by such a boast they confess themselves deficient in one of the greatest perfections appertaining to woman. A little before dinner-time we repaired to General Spada's mansion, and the general presented the two officers to all the ladies. Not one of them was deceived in the young officer, but, being already acquainted with the adventure, they were all delighted to dine with the hero of the comedy, and treated the handsome officer exactly as if he had truly been a man, but I am bound to confess that the male guests offered the Frenchwoman homages more worthy of her sex. Madame Querini alone did not seem pleased, because the lovely stranger monopolized the general attention, and it was a blow to her vanity to see herself neglected. She never spoke to her, except to show off her French, which she could speak well. The poor captain scarcely opened his lips, for no one cared to speak Latin, and the general had not much to say in German. An elderly priest, who was one of the guests, tried to justify the conduct of the bishop by assuring us that the innkeeper and the sbirri had acted only under the orders of the Holy Office. "That is the reason," he said, "for which no bolts are allowed in the rooms of the hotels, so that strangers may not shut themselves up in their chambers. The Holy Inquisition does not allow a man to sleep with any woman but his wife." 20 years later I found all the doors in Spain with a bolt outside, so that travellers were, as if they had been in prison, exposed to the outrageous molestation of nocturnal visits from the police. That disease is so chronic in Spain that it threatens to overthrow the monarchy some day, and I should not be astonished if one fine morning the Grand Inquisitor was to have the king shaved and to take his place.
Chapter 23 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, by Giacomo Casanova. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian Years, by Giacomo Casanova. Episode 26, Chapter 23. I purchase a handsome carriage and proceed to Parma with the old captain and the young French woman. I pay a visit to Javotte and present her with a beautiful pair of gold bracelets. My perplexities respecting my lovely travelling companion. A monologue. Conversation with the captain. Tête-à-tête with Henriette. The conversation was animated, and the young female officer was entertaining everybody, even Madame Querini, although she hardly took the trouble of concealing her spleen. "It seems strange," she remarked, "that you and the captain should live together without ever speaking to each other." "Why, madam, we understand one another perfectly, for speech is of very little consequence in the kind of business we do together." The answer, given with graceful liveliness, made everybody laugh, except Madame Querini. Juliet, who, foolishly assuming the air of a prude, thought that its meaning was too clearly expressed. "I do not know any kind of business," she said, "that can be transacted without the assistance of the voice or the pen." "Excuse me, madam, there are some. Playing at cards, for instance, is a business of that sort." "Are you always playing?" "We do nothing else. We play the game of the Pharaoh, and I hold the bank." Everybody, understanding the shrewdness of this evasive answer, laughed again, and Juliet herself could not help joining in the general merriment. "But tell me," said Count Spada, "does the bank receive much?" "As for the deposits, they are of so little importance that they are hardly worth mentioning." No one ventured upon translating that sentence for the benefit of the worthy captain. The conversation continued in the same amusing style, and all the guests were delighted with the graceful wit of the charming officer. Late in the evening I took leave of the general, and wished him a pleasant journey. "Adieu," he said, "I wish you a pleasant journey to Naples, and hope you will enjoy yourself there." "Well, general, I am not going to Naples immediately. I have changed my mind, and intend to proceed to Parma, where I wish to see the Infante. I also wish to constitute myself the interpreter of these two officers who know nothing of Italian." "Ha, young man, opportunity makes a thief, does it not? Well, if I were in your place, I would do the same." I also bade farewell to Madame Querini, who asked me to write her from Bologna. I gave her a promise to do so, but without meaning to fulfil it. I had felt interested in the young Frenchwoman when she was hiding under the bedclothes. She had taken my fancy the moment she had shown her features, and still more when I had seen her dressed. She completed her conquest at the dinner-table by the display of a wit which I greatly admired. It is rare in Italy, and seems to belong generally to the daughters of France. I did not think it would be very difficult to win her love, and I resolved on trying. Putting my self-esteem on one side, I fancied I would suit her much better than the old Hungarian, a very pleasant man for his age, but who, after all, carried 60 years on his face, while my 23 were blooming on my countenance. It seemed to me that the captain himself would not raise any great objection, for he seemed one of those men who, treating love as a matter of pure fancy, accept all circumstances easily, and give way good-naturedly to all freaks of fortune. By becoming the travelling companion of this ill-matched couple, I should probably succeed in my aims. I never dreamed of experiencing a refusal at their hands. My company would certainly be agreeable to them, as they could not exchange a single word by themselves. With this idea, I asked the captain, as we reached our inn, whether he intended to proceed to Parma by the public coach or otherwise. "As I have no carriage of my own," he answered, "we shall have to take the coach." "Well, I have a very comfortable carriage, and I offer you the 2 back seats if you have no objection to my society." "That is a piece of good fortune. Be kind enough to propose it to Henrietta." "Will you, madam, grant me the favour of accompanying you to Parma?" "I should be delighted, for we could have some conversation. But take care, sir, your task will not be an easy one. You will often find yourself obliged to translate for both of us." "I shall do so with great pleasure. I am only sorry that the journey is not longer. We can arrange everything at supper time. Allow me to leave you now, as I have some business to settle." My business was in reference to a carriage, for the one I had boasted of existed only in my imagination. I went to the most fashionable coffee-house, and, as good luck would have it, heard that there was a travelling carriage for sale, which no one would buy because it was too expensive. 200 sequins were asked for it, although it had but 2 seats and a bracket stool for a third person. It was just what I wanted. I called at the place where it would be seen. I found a very fine English carriage, which could not cost less than 200 guineas. Its noble proprietor was then at supper, so I sent him my name, requesting him not to dispose of his carriage until the next morning, and I went back to the hotel well pleased with my discovery. At supper I arranged with the captain that we would not leave Cesena until after dinner on the following day, and the conversation was almost entirely a dialogue between Henrietta and myself. It was my first talk with a French woman. I thought this young creature more and more charming, yet I could not suppose her to be anything else but an adventuress, and I was astonished at discovering in her those noble and delicate feelings which denote a good education. However, as such an idea would not have suited the views I had about her, I rejected it whenever it presented itself to my mind. Whenever I tried to make her talk about the captain, she would change the subject of conversation, or evade my insinuations with a tact and a shrewdness which astonished and delighted me at the same time, for everything she said bore the impress of grace and wit. Yet she did not elude this question: "At least tell me, madam, whether the captain is your husband or your father?" "Neither the one nor the other," she answered with a smile. That was enough for me, and in reality what more did I want to know? The worthy captain had fallen asleep. When he awoke I wished them both good night, and retired to my room with a heart full of love and a mind full of projects. I saw that everything had taken a good turn, and I felt certain of success, for I was young, I enjoyed excellent health, I had money and plenty of daring. I liked the affair all the better because it must come to a conclusion in a few days. Early the next morning I called upon Count Dandani, the owner of the carriage, and as I passed a jeweller's shop I bought a pair of golden bracelets in Venetian filigree, each 5 yards long and of rare fineness. I intended them as a present for Javotte. The moment Count Dandani saw me he recognized me. He had seen me in Padua at the house of his father, who was a professor of civil law at the time I was a student there. I bought his carriage on condition that he would send it to me in good repair at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Having completed the purchase, I went to my friend Franzia,
and my present of the bracelets made Javotte perfectly happy. There was not one girl in Cesena who could boast of possessing a finer pair, and with that present my conscience fell at ease, for it paid the expense I had occasioned during my stay of 10 or 12 days at her father's house 4 times over. But this was not the most important present I offered the family. I made the father take an oath to wait for me, and never to trust in any pretended magician for the necessary operation to obtain the treasure, even if I did not return or give any news of myself for 10 years. Because, I said to him, in consequence of the agreement in which I have entered with the spirits watching the treasure, at the first attempt made by any other person, the casket containing the treasure will sink to twice its present depth, that is to say, as far as 35 fathoms, and then I shall have myself 10 times more difficulty in raising it to the surface. I cannot state precisely the time of my return, for it depends upon certain combinations which are not under my control, but recollect that the treasure cannot be obtained by any one but I. I accompanied my advice with threats of utter ruin to his family if he should ever break his oath. In this manner I atoned for all I had done, for, far from deceiving the worthy man, I became his benefactor by guarding against the deceit of some cheat, who would have cared for his money more than for his daughter. I never saw him again, and most likely he is dead, but knowing the deep impressions I left on his mind, I am certain that his descendants are even now waiting for me, for the name of Farusi must have remained immortal in that family. Javotte accompanied me as far as the gate of the city, where I kissed her affectionately, which made me feel that the thunder and lightning had had but a momentary effect upon me. Yet I kept control over my senses, and I congratulate myself on doing so to this day. I told her, before bidding her adieu, that her virginity was no longer necessary for my magic operations. I advised her to get married as soon as possible, if I did not return within 3 months. She shed a few tears, but promised to follow my advice. I trust that my readers will approve of the noble manner in which I concluded my magic business. I hardly dare to boast of it, but I think I deserve some praise for my behaviour. Perhaps I might have ruined poor Franzia with a light heart, had I not possessed a well-filled purse. I do not wish to inquire whether any young man, having intelligence, loving pleasure, and placed in the same position, would not have done the same, but I beg my readers to address that question to themselves. As for Capitani, to whom I sold the sheath of St. Peter's knife for rather more than it was worth, I confess that I have not yet repented on his account, for Capitani thought he had duped me in accepting it as security for the amount he gave me, and the Count, his father, valued it until his death as more precious than the finest diamonds in the world. Dying with such a firm belief, he died rich, and I shall die a poor man. Let the reader judge which of the two made the best bargain. But I must return now to my future travelling companions. As soon as I had reached the inn, I prepared everything for our departure, for which I was now longing. Henriette could not open her lips without my discovering some fresh perfection, for her wit delighted me even more than her beauty. It struck me that the old captain was pleased with all the attention I showed her, and it seemed evident to me that she would not be sorry to exchange her elderly lover for me. I had all the better right to think so, insomuch as I was perfection from a physical point of view, and I appeared to be wealthy, although I had no servant. I told Henriette that, for the sake of having none, I spent twice as much as a servant would have cost me, that, by me being my own servant, I was certain of being served according to my taste, and I had the satisfaction of having no spy at my heels, and no privileged thief to fear. She agreed with everything I said, and it increased my love. The honest Hungarian insisted upon giving me in advance the amount to be paid for the post-horses at the different stages as far as Parma. We left Cesena after dinner, but not without a contest of politeness respecting the seats. The captain wanted me to occupy the back seat near Henriette, but the reader will understand how much better the seat opposite to her suited me. Therefore I insisted upon taking the bracket seat, and had the double advantage of showing my politeness and of having constantly and without difficulty before my eyes the lovely woman whom I adored. My happiness would have been too great if there had been no drawback to it. But where can we find roses without thorns? When the charming Frenchwoman uttered some of those witty sayings which proceed so naturally from the lips of her countrywomen, I could not help pitying the sorry face of the poor Hungarian, and wishing to make him share my mirth, I would undertake to translate in Latin Henriette's sallies. But far from making him merry, I often saw his face bear a look of astonishment, as if what I had said seemed to him rather flat. I had to acknowledge to myself that I could not speak Latin as well as she spoke French, and this was indeed the case. The last thing which we learn in all languages is wit, and wit never shines so well as in jests. I was 30 years of age before I began to laugh in reading Terence, Plautus, and Martial. Something being the matter with the carriage, we stopped at Forli to have it repaired. After a very cheerful supper, I retired to my room to go to bed, thinking of nothing else but the charming woman by whom I was so completely captivated. Along the road, Henriette had struck me as so strange that I would not sleep in the second bed in their room. I was afraid lest she would leave her old comrade to come to my bed and sleep with me, and I did not know how far the worthy captain would have put up with such a joke. I wished, of course, to possess that lovely creature, but I wanted everything to be settled amicably, for I felt some respect for the brave officer. Henriette had nothing but the military costume in which she stood, not any women's linen, not even one chemise. For a change she took the captain's shirt. Such a state of things was so new to me that the situation seemed to me a complete enigma. In Bologna, excited by an excellent supper, and by the amorous passion which was every hour burning more fiercely in me, I asked her by what singular adventure she had become the friend of the honest fellow, who looked her father rather than her lover. "If you wish to know," she answered with a smile, "ask him to relate the whole story himself, only you must request him to not omit any of the particulars." Of course I applied at once to the captain, and having first ascertained by signs that the charming Frenchwoman had no objection, the good man spoke to me thus: "A friend of mine, an officer in the army, having occasion to go to Rome, I solicited a furlough of 6 months, and accompanied him. I seized with great delight the opportunity of visiting a city, the name of which has a powerful influence on the imagination, owing to the memories of the past attached to it. I did not entertain any doubt that the Latin language was spoken there in good society, at least as generally as in Hungary, but I was indeed greatly mistaken, for nobody can speak it, not even the priests, who only pretend to write it, and it is true that some of them do so with great purity. I was therefore rather uncomfortable during my stay in Rome, and with the exception of my eyes, my senses remained perfectly inactive. I spent a very tedious month in that city, the ancient queen of the world, when Cardinal Albani gave my friend dispatches for Naples. Before leaving Rome he introduced me to his eminence, and his recommendation had so much influence that the cardinal promised to send me very soon with dispatches for the Duke of Parma, Piacenza, and Guastalla, assuring me that all my travelling expenses would be defrayed. As I wished to see the harbour, called in former times Centum Caeli, and now Civita Vecchia, I gave up the remainder of my time to that visit, and I proceeded there with a cicerone who spoke Latin. I was loitering about the harbour when I saw, coming out of a tartan, an elderly officer, and this young woman dressed as she is now. Her beauty struck me, but I should not have thought any more about it, if the officer had not put up at my inn, and in an apartment over which I had a complete view whenever I opened my window. In the evening I saw that couple taking supper at the same table, but I remarked that the elderly officer never addressed a word to the young one. When the supper was over, the disguised girl left the room, and my companion did not lift his eyes from a letter that he was reading, as it seemed to me with the deepest attention. Soon afterwards the officer closed the windows, the light was put out, and I suppose my neighbours went to bed. The next morning, being up early as is my habit, I saw the officer go out, and the girl remained alone in the room. I sent my cicerone, who was also my servant, to tell the girl, in the garb of an officer, that I would give her 10 sequins for an hour's conversation. He fulfilled my instructions, and on his return he informed me that her answer, given in French, had been to the effect that she would leave for Rome immediately after breakfast, and that, once in that city, I should easily find some opportunity of speaking with her. "I can find out from the vetturino," said my cicerone, "where they put up in Rome, and I promise you to inquire of him." She left Civita Vecchia with the elderly officer, and I returned home on the following day. 2 days afterwards the cardinal gave me the dispatches, which were addressed to M. Dutillot, the French minister, with a passport and the money necessary for the journey. He told me with great kindness that I need not hurry on the road. I had almost forgotten the handsome adventuress, when, 2 days before my departure, my cicerone gave me the information that he had found out where she lived, and that she was with the same officer. I told him to try to see her, and to let her know that my departure was fixed for the day after the morrow. She sent me word by him that, if I would inform her of the hour of my departure, she would meet me outside the gate, and get into the coach with me to accompany me on the way. I thought the arrangement very ingenious, and during the day I sent the cicerone to tell her the hour at which I intended to leave, and where I would wait for her outside of the Porto del Popolo. She came at the appointed time, and we have remained together ever since. As soon as she was seated near me, she made me understand by signs that she wanted to dine with me. You may imagine what difficulty we had in understanding one another, but we guessed somehow the meaning expressed by our pantomime, and I accepted the adventure with delight. We dined gaily together, speaking without understanding, but after the dessert we comprehended each other very well. I fancied that I had seen the end of it, and you might imagine how surprised I was when, upon my offering her the 10 sequins, she refused most positively to take any money, making me understand that she would rather go with me to Parma, because she had some business in that city, and did not want to return to Rome. The proposal was, after all, rather agreeable to me. I consented to her wishes. I only regretted my inability to make her understand that, if she was followed by anyone from Rome, and if that person wanted to take her back, I was not in a position to defend her against violence. I was also sorry that, with our mutual ignorance of the language spoken by each of us, we had no opportunity of conversation, for I should have been greatly pleased to hear her adventures, which I think must be interesting. You can, of course, guess that I have no idea of who she can be. I only know that she calls herself Henriette, and that she must be a Frenchwoman, that she is as gentle as a turtle-dove, and that she has evidently received a good education, and that she enjoys good health. She is witty and courageous, as we both have seen, I in Rome, and you in Cesena at General Spada's table. If she would tell you her history, and allow you to translate it for me in Latin, she would indeed please me very much, for I am sincerely her friend, and I can assure you that it will grieve me to part from her in Parma. Please to tell her that I intend to give her the 30 sequins I received from the Bishop of Cesena, and that if I were rich I would give her more substantial proofs of my tender affection. Now, sir, I shall feel obliged to you if you will explain it all to her in French. I asked whether she would feel offended if I gave her an exact translation. She assured me that, on the contrary, she wished me to speak openly, and I told her literally what the captain had related to me. With a noble frankness, which a slight shade of shame rendered more interesting, Henriette confirmed the truth of her friend's narrative, but she begged me to tell him that she would not grant his wish respecting the adventures of her life. Be good enough to inform him, she added, that the same principle which forbids me to utter a falsehood does not allow me to tell the truth. As for the 30 sequins which he intends to give me, I will not accept even one of them, and he will deeply grieve me by pressing them upon me. The moment we reach Parma, I wish him to allow me to lodge wherever I may please, to make no inquiries whatever about me, and in case he should happen to meet me, to crown his great kindness to me by not appearing to ever have known me. She uttered the last words of this short speech, which she had delivered very seriously, and with a mixture of modesty and resolution. She kissed her elderly friend in a manner which indicated esteem and gratitude rather than love. The captain, who did not know why she was kissing him, was deeply grieved when I translated what Henriette had said. He begged me to tell her that, if he was to obey her with an easy conscience, he must know whether she would have everything she required in Parma. You can assure him, she answered, that he need not entertain any anxiety about me. This conversation had made us all very sad. We remained for a long time thoughtful and silent, until, feeling the situation to be painful, I rose, wishing them good night, and I saw that Henriette's face wore a look of great excitement. As soon as I found myself alone in my room, deeply moved by conflicting feelings of love, surprise, and uncertainty, I began to give vent to my feelings as a kind of soliloquy, as I always do when I am strongly excited by anything. Thinking is not, in those cases, enough for me. I must speak out loud, and I throw so much action, so much animation into these monologues that I forget that I am alone. What I knew now of Henriette had upset me altogether. "Who can she be?" I said, speaking to the walls. "This girl who seems to have the most elevated feelings under the veil of the most cynical libertinism. She said that in Parma she wishes to remain perfectly unknown, her own mistress, and I cannot, of course, flatter myself that she will not place me under the same restrictions as the captain, to whom she has already abandoned herself. Good-bye to my expectations, to my money, to my illusions. But who is she? What is she? She must have either a lover or a husband in Parma, or she must belong to a respectable family, or, perhaps, thanks to a boundless love for debauchery, and to her confidence in her own charms, she intends to set fortune, misery, and degradation at defiance, and to try to enslave some wealthy nobleman. But that would be the plan of a madwoman, or a person reduced to utter despair, and that does not seem to be the case with Henriette. Yet she possesses nothing. True, but she refused, as if she had been provided with all she needed, the kind assistance of a man who has the right to offer it, and with whom, in sooth, she can accept without blushing, since she has not been ashamed to grant him favours with which love had nothing to do. Does she think that it is less shameful for a woman to abandon herself to the desires of a man unknown and unloved, than to receive a present from an esteemed friend, and particularly at the eve of finding herself in the street, entirely destitute in the middle of a foreign city, amongst people whose language she cannot even speak? Perhaps she thinks that such conduct will justify the faux pas of which she had been guilty with the captain, and give him to understand that she had abandoned herself to him only for the sake of escaping from the officer with whom she was in Rome. But she ought to be quite certain that the captain does not entertain any other idea. He shows himself so reasonable that it is impossible to suppose that he ever admitted the possibility of having inspired her with a violent passion, because she might have seen him once through a window in Civita Vecchia. She might possibly be right, and feel herself justified in her conduct towards the captain, but it is not the same with me, for with her intelligence she must be aware that I would not have travelled with them if she had been indifferent to me. She must know that there is but one way that she could obtain my pardon. She may be endowed with many virtues, but she has not the only one which could prevent me from wishing the reward which every man expects to receive at the hands of a woman he loves. If she wants to assume the prudish manners towards me and make a dupe of me, I am bound in honour to show her how much she is mistaken. After this monologue, which made me still more angry, I made up my mind to have an explanation in the morning before our departure. I shall ask her, I said to myself, to grant me the same favours which she had so easily granted to her old captain, and if I meet with a refusal, the best revenge will be to show her a cold and profound contempt until our arrival in Parma. I felt sure that she could not refuse me some marks of real or pretended affection, unless she wished to make a show of a modesty which certainly did not belong to her, and knowing that her modesty would only be all pretence, I was determined not to be a mere toy in her hands. As for the captain, I felt certain, from what he had told me, that he would not be angry with me if I risked a declaration, for as a sensible man he can only assume a neutral position. Satisfied with my wise reasoning, and with my mind fully made up, I fell asleep. My thoughts were too completely absorbed in Henriette for her not to haunt my dreams. But the dream which I had throughout the night was so much like reality that, on waking, I looked for her in my bed, and my imagination was so deeply struck with the delights of that night that, if my door had not been fastened with a bolt, I should have believed that she had left me during my sleep to resume her place near the worthy Hungarian. When I was awake, I found that the happy dream of the night which had turned my love for that lovely creature into a perfect amorous frenzy, and it could not be otherwise. Let the reader imagine a poor devil going to bed, broken down with fatigue and starvation. He succumbs to sleep, that most imperative of all human wants, but in his dream he finds himself before a table covered with every delicacy. What will then happen? Why, a very natural result. His appetite, much more lively than on the previous day, does not give him a minute's rest. He must satisfy it or die of sheer hunger. I dressed myself, resolved on making sure of the possession of the woman who had inflamed all my senses, even before resuming our journey. If I do not succeed, I said to myself, I will not go one step further. But in order not to offend against propriety, and not to observe the reproaches of an honest man, I felt that it was my duty to have an explanation with the captain in the first place. I fancy that I hear one of those sensible, calm, passionless readers, who have the advantage of what is called a youth without storms, or one of those whom old age has forced to become virtuous, exclaim, "Can anyone attach so much importance to such nonsense?" Age has calmed my passions down by rendering them powerless, but my heart has not grown old, and my memory has kept all the freshness of youth, and, far from considering that sort of thing a mere trifle, my only sorrow, dear readers, arises from the fact that I have not the power to practice, to the day of my death, that which has been the principal affair of my life. When I was ready, I repaired to the chamber occupied by my two travelling companions, and, after paying each of them the usual morning compliments, I told the officer that I was deeply in love with Henriette, and I asked him whether he would object to my trying to obtain her as my mistress. The reason for which she begs you, I added, to leave her in Parma and not to take any further notice of her, must be that she hopes to meet some lover of hers there. Let me have half an hour's conversation with her, and I flatter myself that I can persuade her to sacrifice that lover for me, and if she refuses me, I remain here. You will go with her to Parma, where you will leave my carriage at the post, only sending me a receipt, so I can claim it whenever I please. As soon as breakfast is over, said the excellent man, I shall go and visit the Institute, and leave you alone with Henriette. I hope you may succeed, for I should be delighted to see her under your protection, when I part with her. Should she persist in her first resolution, I could easily obtain a vetturino here, and you could keep your carriage. I thank you for your proposal, and it would grieve me to leave you. Highly pleased at having accomplished half of my task, and at seeing myself near the denouement, I asked the lovely Frenchwoman whether she would like to see the sights of Bologna. I should like it very much, she said, if I had some other clothes, but with such a costume as this I do not dare show myself about the city. Then you do not want to go out? No. Can I keep you company? That would be delightful. The captain went out immediately after breakfast. The moment he had gone, I told Henriette that her friend had left us alone purposely, so as to give me the opportunity of a private interview with her. Tell me now whether you intended the order which you gave him yesterday to forget you, never to inquire after you, and not even to know you if he happened to meet you from the time of our arrival in Parma, for me as well as for him. It is not an order that I gave him. I have no right to do so, and I could not so far forget myself. It is only a prayer I address to him, a service which circumstances have compelled me to claim at his hands, and he has no right to refuse me. I have never entertained any doubt of his granting my command. As far as you are concerned, it is certain that I should have addressed the same prayer to you, if I had thought that you had any views about me. You have given me some marks of your friendship, but you must understand that if, under the circumstances, I am likely to be injured by the kind of attentions of the captain, yours would injure me much more. If you have any friendship for me, you should have felt all of that. As you know, I entertain great friendship for you. You cannot possibly suppose that I would leave you alone, without money, without resources, in the middle of a city where you cannot even make yourself understood. Do you think that a man who feels for you the most tender affection can abandon you when he has been fortunate enough to make your acquaintance, when he is aware of the sad position in which you are placed? If you think such a thing possible, you must have a very false idea of friendship, and should such a man grant your request, he would only prove that he is not your friend. I am certain that the captain is my friend. Yet, you have heard him. He will obey me and forget me. I do not know what sort of affection that honest man feels for you, or how far he can rely upon the control he may have over himself, but I know that if he can grant you what you have asked from him, his friendship must be of a nature very different from mine, for I am bound to tell you that it is not only impossible for me to afford you willingly the strange gratification of abandoning you in your position, but even that, if I go to Parma, you cannot possibly carry out your wishes, because I love you so passionately that you must promise to be mine, or I must remain here. In that case you must go to Parma alone with the captain, for I feel that, if I accompanied you any further, I should soon be the most wretched of men. I could not bear to see you with another lover, with a husband, not even in the midst of your family. In fact, I would fain see you and live with you forever. Let me tell you, lovely Henriette, that if it is possible for a Frenchwoman to forget, an Italian cannot do it, at least if I judge from my own feelings. I have made up my mind. You must be good enough to decide now, and to tell me whether I am to accompany you or to remain here. Answer yes or no. If I remain here, it is all over. I shall leave for Naples tomorrow, and I know that I shall be cured in time of the mad passion I feel for you. But if you tell me that I can accompany you to Parma, you must promise me that your heart will forever belong to me alone. I must be the only one to possess you, but I am ready to accept as a condition, if you like, that you shall not crown my happiness until you have judged me worthy of it by my attentions and by my loving care. Now, be kind enough to decide before the return of the too happy captain. He knows all, for I have told him how I feel. And what did he answer? That he would be happy to see you under my protection. But what is the meaning of that smile playing on your lips? Pray, allow me to laugh, for I have never in my life realized the idea of a furious declaration of love. Do you understand what it is to say to a woman in a declaration which ought to be passionate, but at the same time tender and gentle, the following terrible words? Madam, make your choice, either one or the other, and decide instanter. Ha, ha, ha. Yes, I understand perfectly. It is neither gentle, nor gallant, nor pathetic, but it is passionate. Remember that this is a serious matter, and that I have never yet found myself so much pressed by time. Can you, on your side, realize the painful position of a man who, being deeply in love, finds himself compelled to take a decision which may perhaps decide issues of life and death? Be good enough to remark that, in spite of the passion raging in me, I do not fail in the respect I owe you, that the resolution I intend to take, if you should persist in your original decision, is not a threat, but a worthy effort of a hero, which ought to call for your esteem. I beg of you to consider that we cannot afford to lose time. The word choose must not sound harshly in your ears, since it leaves my fate as well as yours entirely in your hands. To feel certain of my love, do you want to see me kneeling before you like a simpleton, crying and entreating you to take pity on me? No, madam, that would certainly displease you, and it would not help me. I am conscious of being worthy of your love. I therefore ask for that feeling, and not for pity. Leave me if I displease you, but let me go away, for if you are humane enough to wish that I should forget you, allow me to go far away from you so as to make my sorrow less immense. Should I follow you to Parma, I would not answer for myself, for I might give way to my despair. Consider everything well, I beseech you. You would indeed be guilty of great cruelty were you to answer now, come to Parma, although I must beg you not to see me in that city. Confess that you cannot, in all fairness, give me such an answer. Am I not right? Certainly, if you truly love me. Good God, if I love you! Oh, yes! Believe me, my love is immense, sincere. Now, decide my fate. What? Always the same song? Yes. But are you aware that you look very angry? No, for it is not so. I am only in a state of uncontrollable excitement. In one of the decisive hours of my life, I pray to the most fearful anxiety. I ought to curse my whimsical destiny and the Cybri of Cesena. May God curse them too, for without them I should never have known you. Are you, then, so very sorry to have made my acquaintance? Have I not some reason to be so? No, for I have not given you my decision yet. Now I breathe more freely, for I am sure you will tell me to accompany you to Parma. Yes, come to Parma. End of chapter 23, and end of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 1, The Venetian